Chapter 420. It was undeniable that Lan Zi was very strong. Her strength was the same as Lu Ye's, both of them exceeding the spirit stream stage. Perhaps only the 3 malignant tumors of the spirit stream stage from a few months ago had the qualifications to surpass them. However, those 3 had all been at the spirit stream stage for more than a decade, and time had given them the ability to become powerful. Their situation was different from Lu Yi and Lan Zi's. Powerful people had their own secrets, and Lan Zi naturally had her own as well. It was a secret that no one could know. Although she was only at the spirit stream stage, her vision far exceeded that of the spirit stream stage, and the various techniques she had mastered were not something that the spirit stream stage could compare to. She raised her thumb and wiped the corner of her mouth, then looked down. That's right, she was bleeding. She couldn't figure out how there could be a spirit stream stage cultivator in this world who could hurt her. The faint smile on her face disappeared, and her expression became serious. She raised her large sword and held the hilt in front of her with both hands. In an instant, the charming woman gave off a feeling that she was impregnable. It was as if as long as she stood there, no attack could knock her down. Lu Yi naturally wouldn't give her time to breathe. He suddenly exerted force with his feet, and 2 pits immediately appeared on the ground. He left behind afterimages as he rushed toward Lan Zi. Before he even got close, Lu Yi saw the woman suddenly separate her hands, and the large sword in front of her suddenly turned into 2 long swords. This large sword was actually a combination of 2 long swords. Lu Yi was surprised. This woman really had a lot of tricks up her sleeves. However, this didn't affect his speed and determination to kill her. The distance between them quickly closed. Lan Zi suddenly assumed a strange posture. One of the 2 long swords was pointed to the sky and the other to the ground. Her graceful and tall body spun slightly, and the sword slashed out. It met Lu Ye's blade head-on. Sparks flew in all directions, and Lu Ye's forward momentum was stopped. However, the power transmitted from the spirit weapon made Lu Yi realize one thing, and that was that the power contained in his opponent's sword had weakened. Because it was clear that he had the upper hand in this collision. He had a bad feeling and didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue. Instead, he took a step back. Just as he took the step back, Lan Zi's body spun slightly again, and the other long sword came crashing down. Clang! Lu Yi took another step back. Clang, clang, clang. With every sound, Lu Yi had to take a step back. Lan Zi, who had a huge sword in her hand, was extremely powerful, but her attacks were clumsy. Now that the great sword had turned into 2 swords, the strength was somewhat restrained, but the agility and speed of the attack were incomparable to before. Lan Zi had 2 different sword styles, so her fighting style was completely different. What was shocking was that she could perfectly control these 2 styles and switch between them as she pleased. This woman was tall and slender to begin with, and the long sword in her hand was half a foot longer than an ordinary longsword. With her as the center, she was able to attack with a radius of tens of feet. That sword light flashed out, slashing through the void and carrying a sharp killing intent. Lu Yi suddenly thought of a scene. If this woman was surrounded by a large number of enemies, with this move, she would be able to wipe them all out. Now, wherever she went, it was as if she had set off a storm of death. Initially, Lu Yi was still able to block every attack, but as he kept retreating, the speed of his opponent's body became faster and faster, and the frequency of her attacks became higher and higher. After retreating for a dozen steps, Lu Yi was unable to keep up with the opponent's rhythm. Often, out of the 5 sword strikes, he would only be able to block 4, and there was still 1 sword that would definitely hit him. Fortunately, he could still activate the defensive spirit rune, but even so, he could only passively defend. After retreating for another dozen steps, Lan Zi's attack speed increased again, and the clanging sounds of the sword and saber clashing were dense and incessant. Accompanied by the light of the defensive spirit rune shattering, there was also the scene of blood splattering. In just a few breaths' time, Lu Ye's body had more than a dozen wounds of varying depths. He knew that he could not retreat anymore. The battlefield was only so big, and once he retreated to the edge, he would be in a situation where he could no longer retreat. When the storm of death swept over, if he could not block it, he would probably be sliced into pieces in an instant. Should he use flash? He had already used it once just now, and even with the enhancement of the dual sharpness spirit rune, he still could not break through the other party's layer of defense. Lu Yi still did not understand how the other party had blocked that attack, and what was with that layer of defense. Before figuring this out, it was definitely not a good idea to use flash rashly. With a thought, the Pan Mountain Saber in Lu Ye's hand flashed with spirit light. His retreating figure suddenly stopped, and he charged forward. Blood splattered, and at this moment, the defensive spirit rune that had just been formed shattered. Several more wounds appeared on Lu Ye's body, and his flesh was torn apart. However, Lu Ye's saber also landed on Lan Zi's body. The moment the saber touched her body, Lu Ye's eyes were enhanced by the insight spirit rune, and he was more spirited than ever. That invisible layer of defense appeared again, blocking the saber. However, after blocking the saber, the defense disappeared. It was extremely strange. Even with the insight spirit rune in his eyes, Lu Yi could not see what the defense was for a moment. Lu Yi forced Lan Zi to retreat with his saber, and the woman floated more than 10 feet away. She stood on the spot and pointed her 2 swords at Lu Yi, while the other was behind her back. Compared to Lu Ye's sorry state, Lan Zi was undoubtedly much calmer. At the very least, she had no injuries on her body. On the other hand, Lu Ye's clothes were somewhat tattered, and his entire body was wrapped in a thick layer of blood qi. Ever since he challenged the spirit stream list, Lu Yi had never been in such a sorry state. The woman in front of him was definitely the strongest person he had ever met in the spirit stream realm. Lan Zi finally realized that something was wrong. Lu Yi had suffered so many injuries, but not a single drop of blood flowed out. Moreover, the more serious his injuries were, the thicker the blood qi shrouding his body. Lan Zi tilted her head, looking puzzled. The tall and charming woman looked a little silly when she put on such an expression. In her eyes, Lu Yi was like an injured ferocious beast, and the ferocity hidden in his bones had been completely stimulated. The 2 figures flashed at the same time, and in the next instant, the 2 people who had disappeared reappeared at the same time. Their sabers and swords clashed. Lan Zi let out a cry of surprise. The power that Lu Yi displayed this time was much greater than before, and his speed was also much faster than before. The blood-stained spirit pattern was showing its effect. In the previous confrontation, Lu Yi had been slashed by this woman to the point of doubting his life. Although he had constructed the blood-stained spirit pattern, it would take time to take effect, and the results would not be seen immediately. At this point, however much blood Lu Yi had lost, the blood-stained spirit pattern would increase his strength. The blood qi that shrouded his body was the manifestation of the blood-stained spirit pattern. The mountain pan saber was almost dancing into a ball of saber light, while Lan Zi's 2 swords were indescribably fast. At this moment, in terms of strength, Lu Yi undoubtedly had the absolute advantage, because every time they clashed, his swords would be bent back. However, in terms of speed, even with the support of the blood-stained spirit pattern, Lu Yi was still no match for Lan Zi. With 2 swords in hand, Lan Zi stabbed at him from all sorts of unbelievable angles, causing more and more wounds to appear on Lu Ye's body. The mountain pan saber kept slashing at Lan Zi's body, but every time, an invisible barrier appeared on the surface of Lan Zi's body, blocking his attacks. Slowly, Lu Yi began to understand. Although he didn't know how the barrier was formed, it wasn't invincible. As his attacks fell, the barrier showed signs of weakening. However, because his attacks weren't enough to break through the barrier, he still hadn't been able to injure Lan Zi. As long as the barrier was not broken, Lan Zi would be invincible. As if sensing Lu Ye's intention, Lan Zi suddenly said, "That's a spirit robe. As long as my spirit energy is not depleted, the spirit robe will always be there. If you want to defeat me, you will have to exhaust all of my spirit energy." With Lan Zi's cultivation, she naturally had more spirit energy than Lu Yi. Moreover, in a battle like this, Lu Ye's spirit energy was depleted more. Before Lu Ye's spirit energy was depleted, Lan Zi's spirit energy would not be depleted. Lu Yi did not think that Lan Zi suddenly told him this out of kindness. In a battle of life and death, revealing one's trump card to the enemy was undoubtedly a psychological tactic. Lan Zi was clearly telling him that as long as his spirit energy was not depleted, the spirit robe would not be broken. Obviously, she was trying to undermine Lu Ye's confidence. If other cultivators heard this, they would immediately think of retreating. Once such thoughts were born, they would not be far from death. The only thing Lu Yi was sure of was that Lan Zi was not lying. This so-called spirit robe was probably related to her spirit energy. This reminded him of the last battle at the Golden Light Peak. It was a battle between him and the Sacred Flame Sect's Saintess. The other party had used a spirit weapon to create a layer of defense. It was also the type that had an endless supply of spirit energy and was unbreakable. However, reality proved that there was no such thing as an unbreakable defense. There were only weak attacks. If he wanted to break this type of defense, he would have to use methods that exceeded its defensive capabilities. Did he have such a method? He had already used one flash. However, even with the support of the dual sharpness spirit mark, it was still unable to break through the other party's defense. It seemed that he would have to use another kind of blade technique. Over the past few days, he had been observing his third senior brother's blade technique cultivation experience. What he had learned was not only the man blade technique and the blood transmutation technique. There was a simple blade technique recorded in the experience. Lu Yi had used the blood transmutation technique to cultivate one flash. He had also tried using it and had easily mastered it. This blade technique could be used together with one flash. Lu Yi had never tried using it before. He did not know if he could use it with his current strength. However, this was his last hope. If he could not use it, then there was a high probability that he would have to call Yi and Hupo to gang up on Lan Zi. This was a challenge for the Spirit Stream list. The first place on the list was related to the face of both factions. It was not a place to talk about morality. Chapter 421. If even that kind of sword technique couldn't break through Lan Zi's spirit robe, then it would be pointless to call on Yi and Hupa to gang up on her. He had to give it a try. However, Lu Zi was too fast. If he wanted to hit her, he would have to create some openings. As the two clashed, Lu Yi suddenly staggered as if he couldn't keep up. How could Lan Zi let such an opportunity slip by? She stabbed the sword in her right hand through Lu Ye's abdomen and out through his body. Lu Yi groaned. Before Lu Yi could counterattack, Lan Zi's left hand had already stabbed toward his neck. If it hit, Lu Yi would lose his ability to fight even if he didn't die. The sharp long sword rapidly enlarged in his field of vision. Just as the long sword was about to stab him, Lu Yi suddenly raised his left hand to block. The tip of the sword pierced through his palm. Lu Yi stretched his hand forward, allowing the entire sword to pierce through his palm. Then, he clenched his left hand into a fist. Slap. His clenched fist grabbed Lan Zi's hand. The woman on the other side looked up, her eyes filled with astonishment. What entered her eyes was Lu Ye's cold expression. At this moment, she realized something. She had fallen into a trap. Lu Ye's stumbling just now was just a bait to lure her into taking risks. However, this bait also made Lu Yi pay a heavy price. His abdomen had been pierced by a sword and his palm had been pierced by another sword. He was ruthless to his enemy and even more ruthless to himself. Lan Zi felt a sense of danger. Her entire body was tingling with pain. This was a sign that a great crisis was about to descend. Spirit light suddenly flashed from her body. The spirit robe that would only appear when she was in danger appeared in advance this time. Rip! The sound of clothes tearing could be heard. In that instant, Lu Ye's saber-wielding right arm swelled up, tearing the clothes on his right arm apart. His chi and blood converged on his right arm in a very short time, causing his face to turn as pale as a sheet of paper. Lu Yi raised his saber and slashed down. The mountain saber instantly transformed into several afterimages. The flash. Combo slash. In that instant, Lu Yi slashed down 3 times, all of which were enhanced by the double-edged spiritual tattoo. This kind of technique, which allowed one to slash out multiple attacks in a very short period of time, was known as a continuous slash. It was specially used to break through some sturdy defenses, and was most appropriate to use here. Lu Yi originally wanted to make a 4th slash, but after 3 slashes his right arm was completely drained of strength and he could no longer feel it. His entire right arm was swollen to the size of a thigh, his skin split open, his tendons broken, and blood covered his entire body. It looked extremely shocking. He didn't even notice when the Pan Mountain saber flew out. When the first slash landed, Lan Zi's spirit robe perfectly blocked it. When the second slash landed, the spirit robe's luster suddenly became extremely dim. With the third slash, Lan Zi's spirit clothes were torn apart and a terrifying wound was left on her body. The wound started from her right shoulder and ended at her left abdomen. Her flesh was torn apart, and under her torn clothes, her fair skin was exposed. Inside the hideous wound, one could vaguely see her beating heart. Not only did the 3 slashes break Lan Zi's spirit robe, but they also heavily injured her and sent her flying with a huge impact. However, the moment she flew out, Lan Zi's slender legs swept out like a long whip towards Lu Ye's temple. This woman didn't let go of any opportunity to counterattack. She was as ferocious as a beast. In that instant, Lu Ye couldn't move at all. He didn't even have the chance to react before he was sent flying and fell to the ground in a sorry state. 2 long swords were pulled out from his body and palm, and blood spurted out. When he landed, Lu Ye felt dizzy and saw stars. He staggered to his feet, but he was so dizzy that he couldn't stand properly and fell to the ground again. He repeated this several times before he could barely kneel on the ground. While he was in such a sorry state, the other side didn't have it easy either. Lan Zi was stunned by Lu Ye's 3 consecutive slashes. Before this battle, she really didn't think that there would be someone in the spirit stream stage who could hurt her and beat her so miserably. Just as Han Taijun had said to Lu Yi before, she had always had the mentality of playing a game ever since she tried to break into the spirit stream list. Until she met Lu Yi. She had already used all her skills, but she was still almost killed by 3 slashes. The instant she was sent flying by Lu Yi, and Hooper attacked at the same time. The spirit and tiger had followed Lu Yi for so long, so they naturally knew when to attack and when to hide their strength. Previously, Lan Zi had been protected by her spirit cloak, so even if they attacked, it wouldn't have been very effective. However, now that her spirit cloak had been broken, Lu Yi was like an arrow at the end of its flight. Naturally, it was time for them to enter the stage. However, Lan Zi wasn't stupid. She was currently seriously injured, so it was no longer suitable for her to stay and fight. If her opponent was only Lu Yi, she still had a chance to fight. It was hard to say who would win and who would lose. Hoopa suddenly rushed towards her, and a young girl who was throwing out spell techniques appeared. Lan Zi pondered for a moment, then her lips quickly moved and her figure disappeared from the battlefield. His spell technique missed, and her nose was about to become crooked from anger. She hurriedly rushed to Lu Ye's side, only to see Lu Yi half kneeling on the ground, not moving at all. It seemed that he didn't even have any aura, and his eyes had become extremely dim. With a wah, he burst into tears. Ever since she had followed Lu Yi, she had never seen Lu Yi in such a miserable state. Even when she had brought Lu Yi to Ing Mountain to ask Hua Xiai for help, she hadn't been so miserable. She quickly laid Lu Yi flat and called out to Hoopa, "Hurry and take Lu Yi out of here." Hearing this, Hoopa ran back with the Panshan saber in his mouth and bit down on Lu Ye's collar. Before he flashed back into Hoopo's body, she raised her head and yelled at the sky, "Send us out." The heavens fell from the unseen world, and the battle arena became empty without a single person. On the 3rd floor of the wooden hut, Hooper appeared with Lu Yi in his mouth. His panicked voice rang out from Hoopo's body, "Sister Hua Xiai, Sister Hua Xiai." The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was sealed, so Yi couldn't reveal herself. However, when she hid in Hoopo's body, she could actually communicate with others. "I'm here." Hua Xi's voice immediately rang out. She had been waiting here all this time, and she had already prepared some hot water and medicinal bandages in the hut. Clearly, she knew that Lu Yi would definitely be injured in this battle. Hugging Lu Yi, Hua Xiai placed him on the bed and sat beside him. She examined his injuries, and her expression gradually became serious. When she raised her head to look at Lu Ye's face again, she saw that his eyes were open. The light in his eyes was dim, but they seemed to be filled with anticipation for tomorrow and the future. Yi asked nervously, "Sister Hua Xiai, how is he?" Hua Si pursed her lips and didn't say anything. She only raised her hand to cover Lu Ye's eyes and stroked them downwards. He's heart thumped and her voice trembled. Sister Hua Si? HM? Hua Si responded. Seeing that Lu Ye's eyes were still open, she raised her hand to cover his eyes again. What are you trying to do, you evil woman? Lu Yi blinked, his voice extremely weak. I'm not dead yet. I just don't want to move and save my energy. I know you're not dead, Hua Si argued. Didn't I want you to have a good rest? You're the one who's acting like you died with your eyes open. Lu Yi was so angry that his liver hurt. He simply closed his eyes and ignored her. He said angrily, You're still joking at a time like this? After a thorough examination, they found that Lu Ye's injuries were very serious. The injuries that Lan Zi had left on him were actually nothing serious. Most of them were flesh wounds or penetrating wounds. With Lu Ye's current physique and Hua Si's methods, he would recover in a few days. The key was Lu Ye's right arm. In order to perform the flash blade technique, Lu Ye's entire right arm had been torn apart. Right now, his right arm was as swollen as his thigh. His blood and qi had stagnated there, and he was injured both openly and covertly. Even with Hua Si's methods, it would take some effort to heal him. Especially now that spiritual energy was restricted, many methods were difficult to use. Half a day later, Lu Yi soaked in a wooden tub filled with dark green medicinal liquid. Hua Si sat beside him, massaging his right arm's blood circulation. The room was steaming hot and filled with mist. The battle that had attracted the attention of countless cultivators from both sides had quietly ended. However, the result of this battle was still inadvertently spread. Lan Zi from Boundless Island, who had imitated Lu Yi and rushed to third place, was seriously injured when she challenged Lu Ye from the Jade Blood sect. When the news spread, it didn't cause too much of a stir. The main thing was that Lu Ye's strength had been deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. Although the Myriad Demon Ridge felt that Lan Zi's challenge was an opportunity, no one knew how big this opportunity was. Now that Lan Zi had lost, the Myriad Demon Ridge didn't suffer any losses anyway. On the other hand, the Grand Heaven Alliance heaved a sigh of relief. As the one being challenged, it was natural for Lu Yi to win. If he lost, the first place would be lost. At that time, many people from the Myriad Demon Ridge would definitely jump out and clamor. However, whether it was the Grand Heaven Alliance or the Myriad Demon Ridge, they all understood one thing. The huge Spirit Stream battlefield was about to enter an era of domination by one person. This was something that had never happened before. The previous 3 malignant tumors, whether it was Feng Yuechan, Li Baxian, or Yan Xing, were all strong enough. However, the 3 of them belonged to 2 large factions and were opposing each other, so they restrained each other. Moreover, their strength was only individual strength and couldn't bring much benefit to the entire faction. However, Lu Ye was different. Not only was he strong individually, but he could also do things that the 3 malignant tumors couldn't. Back when he was in the inner circle, he had stirred up a storm and led the Grand Heaven Alliance to destroy 100 or 200 sects encampments in the Myriad Demon Ridge. These days, he hadn't been idle in the core circle and had constantly stirred up trouble. Although he hadn't destroyed any sects encampments, who could guarantee that he wouldn't do such a thing after advancing to the 9th heaven? If he really did so, no one in the Myriad Demon Ridge would be able to stop him. For a time, the upper echelons of the various factions in the Myriad Demon Ridge were so worried that their hair turned white. After Lu Ye advanced to the 9th heaven, how to protect their own encampments was the most urgent problem that all the sects in the core circle of the Myriad Demon Ridge had to face. Chapter 422. Name: Lu Ye. Identity: Disciple of the Jade Blood Sect. Cultivation: 335 apertures. Location: Spirit Stream Battlefield. Merit points: 9,352 points. It had been a long time since Lu Yi had used the battlefield imprint to check his complete information. Currently, he was seriously injured and was recuperating in the wooden house. Besides cultivating and reading, there was nothing else he could do. Looking at the column of names, Lu Yi frowned, a sense of sadness rising in his heart. His name was clearly Lu Yi, but he didn't know when the heavens had decided that his name was Lu Ye. This was the case on the spirit stream list, and now even the information in the battlefield imprint was the same. It had been more than 2 months since he had ascended to Heaven 8, but he had only opened 335 apertures. His speed wasn't that fast, especially with the howling of the magnetic field and the restriction of spiritual power. He couldn't even use the gluttony meal, so his cultivation efficiency had decreased by a lot. He was only 25 apertures away from Heaven 9, and he wasn't far away. He didn't have too many merit points, and they were all obtained from killing enemies recently. This was the result of him not selling a large amount of spoils to the Heaven's secret treasury. If he had sold all of them to the Heaven's secret treasury, his merit points would have definitely increased by several times. The spirit stream battlefield was like this. It was difficult for cultivators who weren't strong enough to earn merit points, but for people like Lu Yi, it was simply too easy. Especially since he was the enemy of the entire Myriad Devil Ridge camp. He just had to casually run around and there would be a large group of people who wanted to kill him. If they couldn't kill him, they would be killed instead. Every day, under Hua Xi's care, his injuries were quickly recovering. However, the condition of his right arm wasn't optimistic, and it was still swollen. Thinking back to his battle with Lan Zi, Lu Yi was incomparably glad that he had learned some special techniques from his third senior brother Xiao Xinghe's saber technique. With that saber technique, his flash saber technique had been perfected. Moreover, he had also learned combo slash from it. Whether it was flash or combo slash, they were both saber arts and skills. If they were used individually, the burden on Lu Yi was not too great. However, if they were used together, the result would be like this. It had been 6 or 7 days, but his right arm had not recovered. This was under Hua Xi's care. If not for Hua Xi's care, Lu Yi estimated that his right arm would have been crippled. It was undeniable that the combination of one flash and consecutive slashes was a little too powerful. Lan Zi's spirit robe's defense was very strong. Even one flash couldn't break it easily. In the end, Lu Yi had to slash 3 times to break it open. Although it was strong, the aftereffects were huge. The reason for such a huge aftereffect was that the last 3 slashes had taken too much of a toll on Lu Ye's body. The second reason was that Lu Yi wasn't proficient enough in using it. If there were enough of them, the aftereffects wouldn't be so terrible. Over the past few days, Lu Yi had been meditating for 2 hours every day in addition to taking pills to cultivate. He breathed in and out with the Pan Mountain saber to deepen the connection between him and the saber. Other than that, he would read the books he had brought from Madame Yun's place or comprehend his third senior brother's saber techniques. Time passed by quickly. Inside the wooden hut, Lu Yi and Hu Po were on guard. Hua Xi had run off somewhere to cultivate. Now that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth had been sealed off, it had a huge impact on the cultivation of all the cultivators. Only Lu Yi and Hua Xi were not affected much. The former mainly relied on consuming spirit pills to cultivate, while the latter devoured the poisonous fog in the myriad poisons forest. Another month had passed since the baptism bestowed by the heavens. The second baptism was about to arrive. With his previous experience, Lu Yi was looking forward to this kind of reward. Not long after, the heavens descended and his vision began to change. By the time Lu Yi came back to his senses, he was already in the heavenly fate pool. His surroundings were filled with dense spiritual mist. Time was limited, so he hastily set up a spirit gathering formation in the heavenly fate pool. He also constructed small spirit gathering funnels in his spiritual cavities. He flashed out of Hu Po's body. The 2 humans and 1 tiger each found a suitable location and devoured the spiritual mist to their heart's content. They could feel the spiritual mist transforming and improving their bodies. Lu Yi felt it especially clearly because his injuries hadn't healed yet. After receiving the baptism bestowed by the heavens last time, he discovered that the spiritual mist here had the effect of healing the internal injuries that had accumulated in his body. This time, it was even more obvious. His injuries that hadn't completely healed quickly healed. His swollen right arm also began to shrink, slowly returning to its original state. The cool and refreshing feeling made him feel incomparably comfortable. The only thing that made Lu Yi feel regretful was that even though he was the Spirit Stream champion, he could only stay in the heavenly fate pool for an hour. The time was too short. If he stayed long enough, he might be able to obtain even more benefits. However, after thinking about it, the spiritual mist here had limited effects on cultivators. Most cultivators came in 3 or 4 times before it lost its effect. He was only at the Heaven 8 stage, so he still had a chance to come in. Another thing was that when Lu Yi tried to collect some spiritual mist here last time, he seemed to have touched the Heaven's mysteries. This made him faintly suspect that the omnipresent Heaven's mysteries seemed to have its own intelligence. This made Lu Yi rather curious. He didn't know how to test it to confirm this. Lu Yi had a faint feeling that if he could communicate with the Heaven's mysteries, he might be able to figure out the truth of the cultivation world. Why were there 2 opposing factions in the cultivation world, the Grand Heaven Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge? Why did cultivators from different factions kill each other to gain merits? What was the situation with the Heavenly Fate Treasury? What was the relationship between the Heavenly Fate Merchant Alliance and the Heaven's Mysteries? He believed that many cultivators wanted answers to these questions. An hour quickly passed. When the Heaven's Mysteries sent Lu Yi back to the wooden house, his injuries had completely healed. Even his right arm had completely returned to normal. The second baptism bestowed by the Heaven's Mysteries made Lu Yi's qi, blood, and mind even more robust. He could feel that if he used the flash blade technique again, he should be able to make the 4th slash. It wouldn't be like last time, where he could only make 3 slashes. This was undoubtedly a very obvious increase in strength. However, at the Spirit Stream realm, there was only one person who was qualified to make him use this kind of blade technique that could kill 1,000 enemies and injure 800 of his own men. Although the cultivation world of the 9 states was full of talents, there was no such monstrous figure in this world. 2 days later, the magnetic field dissipated, and the spiritual qi of heaven and earth resumed its flow. Lu Yi let out a long breath. As a cultivator, the feeling of having one's spiritual power confined in one's body and unable to use it was simply terrible. During the period of the magnetic field's howling, almost every cultivator would feel an indescribable sense of danger. This was because in that state, not only would one's spiritual power be confined, but even one's perception would be greatly enhanced. It was as if one had suddenly become blind and deaf. No one knew when the danger would come. Lu Yi immediately rearranged the array inside and outside the wooden house. He had been worried about one thing before, and that was that the talent tree's fuel would run out. During this period of time, without the isolation of the array, he had been living in the poisonous fog. Hoopa had also been by Hua Xi's side. Even Yi was trapped in Hoopo's body, unable to move freely. If the talent tree's fuel really ran out, then he would have to rely on Hua Xi to survive here. Fortunately, the crisis had passed. Lu Yi didn't set up another teleportation array because he felt that there was no need for it. He secretly made up his mind that if he didn't ascend to the 9th heaven this time, he would never leave the Myriad Poison Forest. Even if the world outside fell apart, he wouldn't leave. The 3 sacred academies had already been broken through, and the Myriad Devil Ridge would no longer be able to force him to show himself. With the world's spiritual qi, his spiritual power was no longer confined, and his cultivation efficiency had greatly increased. However, because Lu Yi spent a lot of time cultivating his blade technique every day, the speed of his enlightenment had always been stable. He had already thoroughly comprehended his 3rd senior brother's blade technique, and all that was left was practice and comprehension. This required time to settle down, and could not be rushed. On the Spirit Stream list, many familiar names had disappeared, and some unfamiliar names had appeared. It was a perfect example of the saying that each generation had its own talent, and that the new generation would surpass the old. Lan Zi had reached the 2nd position on the Spirit Stream list, but she didn't challenge Lu Yi again. Her strength was indeed strong enough, and she was qualified to compete with Lu Yi for 1st place, but her greatest reliance was that layer of spirit clothes. Since Lu Yi had the means to break through her spirit clothes, she had lost the qualifications to compete with Lu Yi. As long as Lu Yi was still on the Spirit Stream list, she could only settle for 2nd place. Occasionally he would chat with his 2nd senior sister, Shui Yuan, and pass his days leisurely. Time passed, and more than a month went by. When Lu Yi brought Hu Pe and Yi for the 3rd baptism, he discovered a problem. The spiritual mist in the heaven's mystery pond didn't help him or Yi Hu as much as the previous 2 baptisms. During the first and second baptisms, Lu Yi felt that his qi, blood, and mind had increased by at least 10%. This third baptism was less than half of the previous 2. He didn't know how much of an increase he would get next time. It seemed that the rumors about cultivators being baptized 3 or 4 times by the heaven's mystery pond were true. Returning to the wooden house, Lu Yi felt refreshed. He checked his spiritual apertures and found that he had 359 apertures. He only needed 1 more aperture to reach the 9th heaven. When he had first started cultivating, the head teacher had told him that the difficulty of opening apertures would increase as a cultivator reached the end. Therefore, many cultivators in the spirit stream stage were unable to open 360 apertures. Everyone's aptitude and talent were different, and many people had different limits on the number of apertures they could open. However, as long as one switched to a heaven-grade cultivation technique and opened 240 apertures, they would have the qualifications to reach the Cloud River stage. Ever since Lu Yi had opened his apertures, he had never experienced the increasing difficulty that the head teacher had told him about. He felt that every time he opened his apertures, the difficulty was about the same. This was related to the purity of his spiritual power. No matter how pure other cultivators' spiritual power was, as long as they had taken spirit pills, they would have accumulated pill toxins. The higher their cultivation base, the more severe the pill toxins would be. Although there were methods to remove the pill toxins, it was the same as when a cultivator was injured. On the surface, it seemed that the injury had completely healed, but in reality, there were still hidden injuries that couldn't be detected. Chapter 423. Pill toxins accumulated in a cultivator's body were like this. The more pill toxins accumulated, the more difficult it would be to open the apertures. Lu Yi had been using the innate tree to burn pill toxins ever since he started cultivating. Although there was a period of time when the innate tree ran out of fuel, causing a large amount of pill toxins to accumulate, as he replenished the fuel of the innate tree, the accumulated pill toxins were also burned away. His spiritual energy was purer than anyone else's, so he never felt too much resistance during the process of opening the apertures. Of course, in terms of speed of opening the apertures, Giant Armor was fully deserving of the title. Giant Armor was able to rise from the 7th heaven to the Cloud River. Just this point alone was unparalleled throughout history. However, Giant Armor's situation was special. After all, no cultivator would have a Yao core like his. Rousing his spiritual energy, he charged towards the last unopened spiritual aperture. This spiritual aperture was very close to the source aperture, almost right next to it. When a cultivator stepped onto the path of cultivation, the first spiritual aperture they opened was the source aperture. The last spiritual aperture of the spirit stream realm was near the source aperture. This way, when they reached the Cloud River realm, all of the spiritual apertures would be connected, forming a large cycle. Spiritual energy continued to surge, attacking again and again until a certain moment, the thick barrier of the spiritual aperture was broken. Spiritual energy flowed in, filling the newly opened spiritual aperture, the great circle of the spirit stream realm. At this time, the 360 apertures were scattered throughout Lu Ye's limbs and bones. Therefore, if a cultivator accidentally lost an arm or a leg in battle, it would greatly affect their strength. This effect was not only caused by the loss of the limb, but also by the loss of the spiritual aperture, which had a greater impact. Regrowing a severed limb was too far away for the cultivation world of the 9 provinces. No one had ever heard of such a bizarre thing. However, it was possible to reconnect a severed limb. As long as the limb was intact, there was a chance to reconnect it. That required extremely high medical skills. In the spirit stream realm, opening all 360 apertures was the great circle of the spirit stream realm. At this point, the cultivation of the spirit stream realm had basically reached the end. Generally speaking, only cultivators from 3rd rank sects and above had the qualifications to cultivate to the great circle of the spirit stream realm. This didn't mean that the sects above the 3rd rank had any special cultivation methods. It was just that when they recruited disciples, the disciples with good aptitude would be taken in by the sects above the third rank. Only those who were rejected by the sects below the third rank would be recruited by the sects below the third rank. For example, the last recruitment ceremony held by Third Saint Academy was the host. Many small and medium-sized sects were the organizers. The most outstanding disciples would be taken in by Third Saint Academy. The rest would be picked by the small and medium-sized sections. After such rounds of selection, outstanding talents would always appear in the large sects, while the small sects could only accept those with poor aptitudes. However, nothing was absolute. There were always some unpolished gems that were unknown to others when they were young. If those small and medium sects could pick up such talents, they would also have the opportunity to raise their own sect's ranks. Any cultivator who reached the grand completion stage would definitely be able to advance to the true lake stage. There was an 80 to 90% chance that they could even advance to the divine ocean stage. The prerequisite was that they didn't die young. The competition in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures was very cruel. If one was killed on the road to growth, then let alone advancing to the divine ocean stage, it would be difficult to even reach the true lake stage. During this period of time, Lu Yi had killed a lot of 9 heavens cultivators, especially when he was trying to break through to the spirit stream list. In the first few days, almost all of the cultivators he encountered were killed. With the last aperture opened, Lu Yi surged his spiritual energy and passed it through the 60 spirit apertures that were not in a system, making a small cycle. Waves of energy swept out, and his body buzzed. 9 heavens was formed. In an instant, Lu Yi felt some changes in his body. Although the 9 minor circulatory systems in his body were not related to each other, when the 9th minor circulatory system was formed, there seemed to be some resonance between them. The flow of spiritual energy in his body also became much faster. If one listened carefully, they could even faintly hear the sound of flowing water. At this time, if Lu Yi wanted to advance to the Cloud River stage, he could do so at any time. He only needed to connect all the spirit apertures into a large cycle. There was no difficulty. But how could he advance to the Cloud River stage at this time? Not to mention that the baptism bestowed by Tianji had not reached its limit, he also had not properly settled the grudge between him and the cultivators of the Myriad Demons Ridge. During this period of time, he had been cultivating in the Myriad Poisons Forest, and his heart was filled with resentment. Now that he had advanced to the 9 heavens, how could he not vent it? Moreover, he still had some things to do. Conservatively speaking, he would stay in the spirit stream stage for another 1 or 2 months. After the 7 heavens, he changed his cultivation technique to the great sun-colored glass art. This cultivation technique cost him more than 5,200 merit points. It was the most suitable cultivation technique for him in Tianji's treasury, and was the most expensive one. The quality of a cultivation technique depended on the order in which the spirit apertures were connected. If the order in which the spirit apertures were connected was different, the cultivation path would naturally be different. If the cultivation path was different, the efficiency of the spiritual energy in the body would be different. As such, the benefits it could bring to a cultivator would be different. The better the cultivation technique, the faster the spiritual energy would flow. Correspondingly, it could bring a cultivator greater benefits. Compared to the worst cultivation techniques, the great sun-colored glass art's price was several times that of an ordinary heaven-grade cultivation technique. However, the difference of several times could only bring about an increase of 10 to 20%. This was already a very high benefit. A cultivation technique that could increase one's strength by 10 to 20% was extremely tempting to any cultivator. Moreover, the great sun-colored glass art also had the effect of tempering the body. This kind of tempering didn't require Lu Yi to do much. He only needed to maintain the flow of spiritual energy in his body, and it would slowly strengthen his body. Lu Yi didn't feel it. Perhaps his body was strong enough, so the strengthening wasn't obvious, or perhaps the strengthening was subtle. However, this was a product of Tianji's treasury, so it couldn't be a lie. Although he had advanced to the 9 heavens, Lu Yi didn't plan on leaving immediately. The newly formed minor circulation wasn't too stable, so he needed to stabilize it for a few days. This was to prevent the minor circulation from suddenly stopping during a battle. That sudden drop in strength could lead to extremely bad consequences. In the small courtyard, Lu Yi meticulously practiced his saber arts. Hua Xiai returned from cultivating outside and glanced at Lu Yi. 9 heavens? Congratulations. Lu Yi put away his saber and casually replied, "There's nothing to congratulate me about." Hua Xiai had advanced to the 9 heavens more than half a month ago. Her cultivation speed was so fast that it was simply amazing. "You're ready to leave?" Hua Xiai asked. Although Lu Yi hadn't told her about his plans, she could feel that after his cultivation reached the 9 heavens, Lu Yi couldn't continue to stay here. "What do you plan to do in a few days?" "I don't have any plans. You're already in the 9 heavens. You're not going to attack the Spirit Stream list, nor are you going to advance to the Cloud River realm. What do you want to do? Moreover, you're already in the 9 heavens. How are you going to cultivate?" This was the thing that Lu Yi couldn't figure out the most. Logically speaking, after reaching the 9 heavens, unless one advanced to the Cloud River realm, there was no way to increase their cultivation. However, Hua Xiai was still going out early and returning late every day. He had gone to see her before and found that she was still devouring the poisonous fog in the forest of 1,000 poisons. She didn't know why she was doing so. Moreover, Lu Yi didn't know if it was an illusion or not, but recently he felt that the poisonous fog in the vicinity seemed to have thinned out a lot. "I have my own ways." Hua Xiai pursed her lips and smiled, but didn't elaborate. "I'm going to cook. What do you want to eat tonight?" Lu Yi casually took out a large piece of beast meat from his storage bag and threw it to her. 3 days passed in a flash. Everything was ready and Lu Yi was ready to leave. Hua Xiai straightened his clothes for him and spoke in the tone of a kind mother sending her son off. "Be careful when you're outside." The corner of Lu Ye's eyes couldn't help but twitch. It wasn't like he was going to run to the ends of the earth. Moreover, he had left the forest of 1,000 poisons several times in the past and Hua Xiai hadn't warned him about anything. "I don't have anything to give you. This is for you to protect yourself." As Hua Xiai spoke, under Lu Ye's dumbstruck gaze, she opened her mouth and gently spat out a green, round, thumbnail-sized ball that floated out of her mouth. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes twitched even more because when Hua Xi's breath blew on his face, not only did he smell the fragrance of orchids, but a large amount of gray fog also ignited on his talent tree. This woman, even her breath now carries poison. "What is this?" Lu Yi instinctively felt that this green ball wasn't anything good. 1,000 poisons pill? Hua Xiai smiled and took out a wooden box. She put the 1,000 poisons pill inside and slapped it on Lu Ye's hand. "If you're surrounded by a lot of people and can't escape, use your spiritual power to throw this thing out." "What effect does it have?" Hua Xiai tilted her head and thought for a moment. "I don't know. I've never used it before. Try it later and tell me the result." Lu Yi carefully put the wooden box into his storage bag and placed it in the safest place. "Let's go." Lu Yi called out to Hupa, and the cat-like Hupa jumped onto his shoulder. Then, Lu Yi summoned his own spirit boat and soared into the sky. Standing in the same place, Hua Xiai watched Lu Yi leave until the stream of light disappeared from her sight. Then she turned around and walked towards the place where she usually cultivated. As she moved forward, her cultivation, which was originally at the 9th heaven level, quickly fell. In just a short period of time, it fell to the 8th heaven level. Condensing that 1,000 poisons pill was obviously not without consumption for her. What was consumed was actually her own cultivation. In the cultivation world of the 9 provinces, there had never been such a bizarre cultivation method or secret technique. Arriving at the place where she usually cultivated, she sat down cross-legged. In a breath, a large amount of thick poisonous fog gathered towards her. In a short moment, it condensed into a ball in front of her. That ball of thick poisonous fog rapidly rotated, and a strong suction force caused even more poisonous fog to gather. In a short moment, a vortex was formed in front of Hua Xiai. Chapter 424. Although Lu Yi had ascended to the 9th heaven a few days ago, he hadn't displayed his cultivation base in front of anyone since his ascension, so his mark on the spirit stream list was still 8th heaven. Aside from Hua Xiai, No one else in the spirit stream battlefield knew that he had ascended to the 9th heaven. The first 2 times he had left the myriad poisons forest, his whereabouts had been quickly exposed, causing many cultivators from the myriad devil ridge to surround him. This time, however, it was much quieter. He flew the spirit boat for several hundred kilometers before he saw 3 streaks of light in the distance. In the core region, many cultivators flew high in the air for the sake of convenience. Generally speaking, it wasn't too dangerous. As long as they were vigilant enough, even if they encountered an enemy, they could still escape if they couldn't beat them, unless the difference in speed between them was too great. Seeing the 3 streaks of light, Lu Yi flew straight towards them. The 3 cultivators clearly saw Lu Yi and stopped in place to wait. They didn't know where these 3 had come from or where they were going. Lu Yi didn't know which faction they were in, and they didn't know which faction they were in. The only reason they dared to stop was because they had the advantage in numbers. If they were in the same faction, there wouldn't be any disputes. If they were in the enemy faction, they could still take advantage of the situation. The distance between them quickly closed. When they were about 300 meters away, one of the 3 cultivators suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. He focused his vision in Lu Ye's direction and said, "Senior Marshal Brotherly, doesn't that guy look like Lu Ye?" The other 2 were startled. The cultivator called Senior Marshal Brotherly said, "Don't scare me." Suddenly, he remembered that this place wasn't too far from the myriad poisons forest, so there was a chance that they would run into Lu Ye. He quickly focused his vision and saw a young man rapidly approaching them. On the young man's shoulder was a snow-white monster beast. Who else could it be but Lu Ye? "Run!" shouted the cultivator surnamed Li. The 3 of them immediately panicked and tried to escape. However, it was too late. 9 streaks of light split into 3 groups and attacked the 3 cultivators. The 3 cultivators' cultivations weren't too high. 2 were 8th heaven and 1 was 7th heaven, so how could they block the power of Lu Ye's artifact? Short blood-curdling screams rang out as fresh blood sprinkled down from the sky. By the time Lu Yi arrived at their original position, the 3 of them were already dead. After advancing to the 9th heaven, Lu Ye's strength had increased greatly. Killing these myriad Devil Ridge cultivators had become easier and easier. He flashed out. She casually swept through the battlefield and collected the spoils of war. Then Li set off once more. Along the way, whenever he encountered a cultivator, Lu Yi would step forward to confirm which faction they belonged to. After a few days, all the cultivators he encountered from the myriad Devil Ridge were killed on the spot. 3 days later, Lu Yi appeared outside the defensive formation of a myriad Devil Ridge encampment called the Profound Azure Palace. With the augmentation of the Clear Vision Spirit runes, he observed the nodes of this formation. A cultivator with large sleeves and a loose robe heard the news and came over, shouting at Lu Yi through the light screen of the Grand Formation, "Who are you?" After asking the question, he took a closer look at Lu Yi. Then, his expression changed drastically as he exclaimed in horror, "Lu Yi!" The cultivator was so scared that his face turned pale. He never expected that the famous Lu Yi would suddenly appear outside his encampment. Moreover, judging from his posture, it was obvious that he did not come with good intentions. He hurriedly circulated his spirit energy and shouted, "Lu Yi is here!" With a roar, the encampment suddenly boiled over. Streams of light soared into the sky and rushed over. Outside the light screen of the Grand Formation, Lu Yi had already raised his hand and shot out a few formation flags. As he did so, the spirit energy in the area covered by the formation flags stopped flowing. He raised his hand and lifted a corner of the Grand Formation as if he was lifting a curtain. Then he walked in leisurely. At this time, several faster cultivators had already arrived, and more were already on their way. How could the cultivators who had rushed here be polite when they saw Lu Yi barging into their encampment? They all activated their techniques and attacked Lu Yi. The moment the Pan Mountain saber was unsheathed, Lu Ye's figure moved and swayed, dodging all the attacks with incomparable precision. He rushed in front of a cultivator and raised his saber. Blood splattered. His figure didn't stop as he rushed to the next one. In just 3 breaths of time, 5 corpses lay on the ground. Blood dripped from the Pan Mountain saber. More cultivators gathered, and a Celestial 9 cultivator roared, "Lu Ye, you're courting death." No one would be able to tolerate someone barging into their encampment alone and killing people. Seeing the figures lying in a pool of blood, the eyes of the profound Azure Palace's cultivators turned red. As soon as the Celestial 9 cultivator's voice fell, spell techniques and the might of imperial artifacts rained down on Lu Ye. With a whoosh, fiery red spiritual energy flowed out of Lu Ye's body. Wings spread out from his back and he soared into the sky. All the attacks aimed at him hit nothing but air. He passed through the crowd and fixed his gaze on the Celestial 9 cultivator who had shouted. The fiery red wings on his back gently flapped twice, and he directly rushed in front of the cultivator. An indescribable sense of oppression rushed towards him, accompanied by a cold, murderous intent. The anger and humiliation on the Heavenly 9 cultivator's face had been replaced by shock and panic. Seeing Lu Ye rushing towards him, his figure rapidly fell. Although he was also a Celestial 9 cultivator, he didn't even have the qualifications to enter the Spirit Stream list. How could he feel safe when being targeted by Lu Ye? If he wanted to kill Lu Ye now, he could only rely on the advantage of numbers. Lu Ye's figure moved and he was already in front of him. How could this guy be so fast? A thought popped up in the Celestial 9 cultivator's mind. The flying wing spirit tattoo was much more flexible than Imperial artifact flight, not to mention that Lu Ye had also enhanced himself with the wind spirit tattoo in order to rush forward faster. Using 2 spirit tattoos at the same time, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his speed was like lightning. The Pan Mountain saber wrapped in flames slashed down at the Celestial 9 cultivator, who raised his spirit artifact to block. However, as soon as the 2 spirit artifacts collided, he felt a copious and irresistible force attack him. The spirit artifact flew out of his hand, and the skin between his thumb and forefinger split open. His entire body fell uncontrollably to the ground under the immense pressure. Seeing that Lu Ye's saber was about to strike again, he turned pale with fright. He hurriedly reached into his storage bag and took out a golden body talisman. Before he could slap the golden body talisman on his body, Lu Ye's saber had already slashed down. Blood splattered, and the head was separated from the body. Cries of alarm rang out from below, mixed with mournful roars of anger. The one Lu Ye had killed was none other than the guardian of the profound Azure Palace. In the profound Azure Palace, the guardian had done a very good job. He had taken good care of his junior brothers and sisters. Seeing him killed, the profound Azure Palace cultivators naturally felt grief in their hearts. Lu Ye didn't know that this was a guardian. He was just guessing. After all, even the sects of the core circle had a limited number of Heavenly 9 cultivators. Every one of them was a precious talent. Killing one of them first would reduce the pressure on himself, and second, it would deter the enemy. But now, it seemed that the deterrent effect wasn't great. Instead, it had stimulated the profound Azure Palace cultivators' determination to unite against a common enemy. Everyone looked at him with bloodshot eyes. The anger in their eyes was almost overflowing. After killing the Celestial 9 cultivator, Lu Ye's figure descended. When he was about to hit the ground, he suddenly changed direction and pounced toward the densest part of the crowd. The weapon box at his waist buzzed, and 9 Imperial artifacts flew out. They revolved around each other and crashed into the crowd like a spinning top. Lu Ye's figure followed closely behind the Imperial artifact spinning top, constantly swinging the mountain saber in his hand. Screams and roars rang out one after another. There was also the sound of amber roaring. Every roar fiercely impacted the minds of the cultivators in front, making them dizzy. Lu Ye took the opportunity to kill. After a round of collision, more than 10 corpses lay on the ground. Lu Ye's body was also dyed red with blood. Some of it was his own, and some of it was his enemies'. Fighting one against many, it was impossible for him to be unscathed. Fortunately, he could use the defensive spirit rune to protect his vitals. Lu Ye once again returned to the side of the Grand Formation's light barrier. The long saber in his hand was pointed diagonally at the ground, and his eyelids were slightly lowered. The many profound Azure Palace cultivators across from him were no longer as angry as before. They all looked at Lu Ye in disbelief, and the originally noisy scene suddenly became incomparably quiet. Before this, if someone had told them that there was a person in this world who could single-handedly kill his way into a sect's encampment, and that it was the encampment of a core sect, no one would have believed it. As the saying goes, there is a limit to a person's strength. No matter how strong a person is, there is a limit. Even Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian, 2 of the 3 malignant tumors, were unable to do such a thing back then. First of all, breaking through the defensive formation and entering the encampment was a difficult problem for them. But now, such a thing was right before their eyes, right under their noses. Waves of shock surged in their hearts as they looked at the blood-soaked figure in front of them. The profound Azure Palace cultivators really wanted to ask, "Are you still human?" Lu Yi didn't waste any time. As the 9 Imperial artifacts buzzed, he once again charged into the enemy formation. Having learned their lesson, the profound Azure Palace cultivators immediately scattered and retreated. Lu Yi chased after them, charging forward and leaving corpses behind him. He killed his way to the square in front of the Heaven's Secret Hall, where nearly 70 cultivators were already waiting in formation. There weren't many cultivators in the core sect's encampment. On average, each sect only had about 100 people. Even those with more people didn't exceed 200. Naturally, the profound Azure Palace was the same. The entire sect, including their own cultivators and those affiliated with other sects, only had about 120 people. However, in less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, nearly 30% of the 120 people had been killed. The remaining people had all gathered in front of the Heaven's Secret Hall. Body cultivators came first, followed by weapon cultivators and magic cultivators. As for ghost cultivators, they had already concealed themselves and were looking for a suitable opportunity to launch an attack. Chapter 425. The profound Azure Palace's formation was already strong enough to contend with Overlord-level demon beasts. To them, Lu Ye's current strength wasn't the slightest bit inferior to those legendary Overlord-level demon beasts. The two sides were separated by 60 meters. The atmosphere was solemn and murderous intent surged. Lu Yi, who was standing in place, suddenly turned around and slashed out with his saber. With a flash of saber light, a ghost cultivator who had quietly snuck up to Lu Yi and was about to attack was directly split in half. The ghost cultivator's eyes were filled with disbelief before he died. He couldn't figure out how he had been exposed. The might of this saber strike made even more ghost cultivators who had hidden themselves not dare to act rashly. Lu Yi's perception seemed to be a bit too powerful. It was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for ghost cultivators to ambush him. The saber strike seemed to be a signal. Following the sudden death of the ghost cultivator, the word "kill" suddenly exploded from the profound Azure Palace's formation. In the next instant, an overwhelming number of spells and streams of light from Imperial equipment blasted towards Lu Yi like a torrential downpour. With the support of the Wind Spirit Tattoo, Lu Yi flew forward while dodging one attack after another. In the eyes of the profound Azure Palace's cultivators, Lu Yi's figure was as nimble as a fish in water. 90% of their spells and flying artifacts missed. Occasionally, they would hit him, but they were blocked by the spirit tattoo activated by Lu Yi. The distance of 60 meters was covered in only 3 breaths of time. The body cultivator facing Lu Yi held a spirit artifact shield in front of him. His chi, blood, and spirit power surged together as he assumed an unbreakable stance. Lu Yi's saber-wielding right arm suddenly swelled up. Dense chi and blood converged on his right arm. He aimed at the spirit artifact shield and slashed down. In a flash, under everyone's shocked gazes, the 9 restrictions' great shield shattered into pieces and scattered in all directions. The protective effect it was supposed to have didn't even have the slightest bit of effect. Not only that, the mountain blade also took advantage of the momentum to hack the body cultivator behind the great shield to the ground. A small gap appeared in the profound Azure Palace's tight formation with the fall of the body cultivator. Lu Yi's silhouette was like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountain. He charged into the crowd through the gap, flying around on his weapon as he swung the mountain saber in his hand. When he was a celestial 8, He had once killed his way into the encampment of a myriad Devil Ridge force. In the end, he had been beaten to the point of covering his head and fleeing in a sorry state. But now, his cultivation had already advanced to the 9th heaven, and he had even received 3 baptisms from the heavens. His strength was much stronger than before. The current Lu Yi already had the capital to annihilate a sect by himself. If he didn't have such confidence, how could he have charged into the profound Azure Palace's base? Facing so many enemies alone, the best way to deal with it was to charge into the enemy's formation. Although it was easy to get surrounded like this, it would also allow him to better control the situation and limit the number of enemies who could attack him at the same time. Simply put, it was to make the enemy's hands and feet tied. On the other hand, if he distanced himself, it wouldn't be easy for him to be surrounded. But once he distanced himself, everyone could attack him with their weapons or spells, and the situation would only worsen. After charging into the enemy's formation, there were enemies everywhere, but at most 7 or 8 people could attack Lu Yi at the same time. Moreover, they were all fighting at close range, so Lu Yi didn't have to worry about being harassed by weapons or spells. Every time he killed a person, there would be a few more wounds on his body. Fortunately, Lu Ye's physique was strong enough. Those injuries looked serious, but in fact, they were only superficial wounds. He always used defensive spirit tattoos to protect his vital parts. The scene became chaotic. Hoopa, who was crouching on Lu Ye's shoulder, roared from time to time. Every time it roared, a group of people would be in trouble. In this chaotic situation, a petite figure silently appeared behind the profound Azure Palace's cultivators. It was Yi. When Lu Yi charged into the profound Azure Palace's base and killed the first few cultivators he encountered, Yi came out of Hoopo's body and hid underground. None of the profound Azure Palace's cultivators noticed her when she came out. She held a treasure that looked like a scroll in her hand. It was the 9 realms diagram that Madame Yun had bestowed upon her. She silently arrived behind the profound Azure Palace's cultivators and took advantage of the fact that Lu Ye's massacre had attracted everyone's attention to cover their heads with the 9 realms diagram. In an instant, the cultivators disappeared without a trace, and several figures appeared in the 9 realms diagram. Those figures were vivid and lifelike, and each of them had a stunned expression. Clearly, they didn't know what had happened. The 9 realms diagram was a spirit artifact-level treasure, and it had always been under Yi's control. Although she could only use a bit of the 9 realms diagram's power with her current strength, it was more than enough to deal with spirit stream realm cultivators. After putting away those people, Yi immediately drilled into the ground and went several dozen meters underground. With Yi's current strength, even if she controlled the 9 realms diagram, it would be difficult for her to kill those people by herself. Moreover, she couldn't trap them for too long. It wasn't that the 9 realms diagram wasn't powerful enough, but that she wasn't strong enough. If she was strong enough, she could control the life and death of any enemy trapped in the 9 realms diagram. With a single thought, she could kill them without knowing why. Since she couldn't trap them for too long or kill them easily, she could only let them go. Therefore, after burrowing several hundred feet into the ground, he activated the 9 worlds diagram's power and directly released the people she had taken in. Those cultivators didn't even have the chance to make a sound before they died on the spot. How could a spirit stream realm cultivator withstand the enormous pressure of the ground several dozen meters underground? Only someone like Yi, who was neither real nor virtual, could freely travel underground. She rushed out again and did the same thing. The profound Azure Palace's cultivators were terrified. Lu Yi had charged into their base alone and killed people, which made them feel like they were being looked down upon and offended. They were filled with endless anger. But now, they realized that he really had the ability to do so. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, another 30 out of the 80 people had died. Even the body cultivators who were wielding spirit weapon shields were unable to block his violent slash and were directly split into 2 halves along with their shields. What made them even more puzzled was that many people had disappeared without a trace. No one knew where they had gone, but they were gone just like that. Now, less than 30 people were left of the original 80. The square in front of the heavenly secret hall was filled with blood and corpses were piled up like mountains. The flowers of slaughter bloomed amidst the blood and corpses. The murderer was bathed in blood and seemed to have gone mad. From the beginning to the end, he didn't say a single word and only killed. It was as if he had made up his mind to slaughter the entire profound Azure Palace. With so many people dead, the profound Azure Palace's cultivators who were lucky enough to survive were all terrified. Retreat to the 9 provinces. Finally, someone couldn't take it anymore and shouted. Followers gathered. The profound Azure Palace's cultivators who were lucky enough to survive retreated as they fought. They ran toward the heavenly secret hall and disappeared one by one in front of the heavenly secret pillar. However, in the process, several more people died under the saber. Lu Yi only stopped when she couldn't see any profound Azure Palace's cultivators anymore. He came out from the ground and looked around. She said in shock, "Where did they go?" Relying on the 9 worlds diagram and her special spiritual body, she was constantly moving the enemies. Who would have thought that all of them would suddenly disappear, leaving behind a large number of corpses on the battlefield? They ran away. Lu Yi shook off the bloodstains on the mountain plate saber and sheathed it. What a pity! She thought that she would be able to kill all the profound Azure Palace's cultivators this time, but in the end, some still managed to escape. However, there shouldn't be many of them. 50 miles away from the profound Azure Palace's encampment, many streaks of light rushed over. The one in the lead was the guardian of the 3 sacred academies, Situhan. Behind him were the elites of the 3 sacred academies. The 3 sacred academies and the profound Azure Palace's encampment were neighbors. In this generation, the 3 sacred academies didn't have many capable spirit stream realm cultivators. Their overall strength was weak, so they were often bullied by the profound Azure Palace and the other 2 factions of the myriad Devil Ridge. This was also the reason why the 3 sacred academies wanted Lu Yi to join their encampment. They originally thought that they could rope in Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan to ease the awkward situation of the 3 sacred academies' encampment. However, Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan both advanced to the Cloud River realm. Thus, the matter of Lu Yi joining their encampment was left unsettled. When the 3 sacred academies' encampment was breached, the nearby factions of the myriad Devil Ridge also contributed greatly, especially the profound Azure Palace. As old neighbors, the enmity between them could be said to be innumerable. Although the 3 sacred academies' encampment had been rebuilt, due to the lack of contribution points, the world spirit chi inside the encampment was much weaker than before. Therefore, after receiving Lu Ye's message, Situhan gathered nearly half of his men and aggressively charged toward the profound Azure Palace's encampment. They were prepared to cooperate with Lu Yi and take revenge for that day. Behind Situhan, the group of cultivators all rubbed their fists and were filled with killing intent. "Junior Sister Feng," Situhan suddenly called out. "I'm here." Feng Yu, who was standing behind him, quickly responded. Feng Yu was now a 9th order cultivator, and with the help of the 3 sacred academies, she had gathered enough contribution points to buy a heaven-grade secret art. It wouldn't be long before she broke through to the 7th order. "Where is Brother Yi now?" Situhan asked. "Let me ask," Feng Yu said and quickly sent a message to Lu Yi to ask about the situation. A moment later, her expression turned strange. 5th senior brother said that he is now in the profound Azure Palace's encampment. When Situhan heard this, his expression changed slightly. Brother Yi is so impatient. Has he already killed his way in? After pondering for a moment, he urged his spirit energy and shouted, "Junior brothers and junior sisters, Brother Yi has already killed his way into the profound Azure Palace's encampment. Right now, he might be surrounded on all sides. Hurry up and help him." The group of cultivators responded loudly. In the next moment, everyone's speed increased by a notch. After an incense stick's worth of time, several dozen people rushed to the profound Azure Palace's encampment under Situhan's lead. However, when they looked around, they saw that the profound Azure Palace's defensive array had already been activated. Starting from a certain direction, it extended all the way into the encampment. There were corpses and blood everywhere. The battle over? Situhan was dumbfounded. Chapter 426. Following the traces of the battle, Siduhan led a few dozen people to the square in front of the Heaven's secret hall. From afar, they saw a figure covered in blood sitting on the steps in front of the Heaven's secret hall. A sheathed long saber was casually placed beside him, and in front of him were 200 storage pouches. Looking at his focused posture, it seemed like he was opening the restriction lock on the storage pouches. And that figure that seemed to be covered in blood was none other than Lu Yi, fifth senior brother. Feng Yu quickly stepped forward. Lu Yi raised his head and nodded slightly. He then looked at Siduhan, who had a complicated expression on his face. "You're here?" Siduhan returned to his senses and quickly bowed. He then asked, "Brother Ye, are we late?" "No, we're just in time. The battle just ended." Siduhan originally planned to bring a few dozen people to assist Lu Yi, but when he arrived, he discovered that the battle had already ended. Moreover, it ended with the profound Azure Palace suffering a crushing defeat. He casually counted the corpses scattered around the encampment. There were at least 60 to 70 corpses scattered around the encampment. Suddenly, he realized that Lu Yi didn't seem to have any intention of asking him for help. That was why he said it wasn't too late. "Brother Ye, did you kill all of them by yourself?" "Of course not." Siduhan's heart relaxed. If all of them were killed by one person, it would be too terrifying. However, he didn't see any other helpers. They might have hidden themselves or left. "Hoopa, help me." Lu Yi raised his hand and patted Hoopo's head, who was lying on the side. Didn't he kill all of them by himself? Siduhan's mood was fluctuating because of Lu Yi. He suddenly felt a little dizzy. The disciples of the 3 saint academies behind him swallowed their saliva as well. The miserable state of the profound Azure Palace's encampment was right in front of them. The square in front of the Heaven's secret hall was covered in corpses and blood, and this was actually the work of one person. They had long heard of Jade Blood Sect's Lu Ye's outstanding strength and methods, but only after witnessing it with their own eyes did they realize that the rumors were true. Siduhan took a deep breath and said with a complicated expression, "Brother Yi, you asked me to come over because you want to?" He was a little confused. Since Lu Yi had the ability to slaughter an entire sect, why did Feng Yu ask him to come over? He originally thought that Lu Yi wanted him to bring some people to help, but now it seems that was not the case. "Last time, because of me, the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment was destroyed. I asked around and found out that the profound Azure Palace played a big part in it. As the saying goes, an eye for an eye. Since they destroyed the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment, I'll destroy the profound Azure Palaces." By the way, didn't our sect leader make an agreement with the 3rd Sacred Academy? I'm already at the 9th level of heaven, and I'll be leaving the Spirit Stream battlefield soon, so I can't keep my end of the bargain. Before I leave, I'll take the opportunity to relieve some pressure on the 3rd Sacred Academy. Siduhan was speechless. This wasn't just relieving the pressure. Judging from the result of this battle, the profound Azure Palace had lost so many people. In the future, they could forget about riding on the heads of the 3rd Sacred Academy. Nothing in the profound Azure Palace has been touched. "Brother Situ, please help yourself." The group from 3rd Sacred Academy became excited. They all understood what Lu Yi meant. Siduhan was even more ashamed. "How can I accept that? We didn't do anything." In the inner circle, the Heaven Expanse sect's encampment was destroyed because of me. Whatever they lost, I'll bring them back. Since the 3rd Sacred Academy's encampment was destroyed because of me, I should treat everyone equally. Brother Situ, please don't refuse. In the future, many of my Jade Blood Sect's disciples will come to your sect's encampment to train. At that time, I'll have to ask your sect to take care of us." Hearing Lu Ye's words, Siduhan no longer refused. "Then I won't be polite. In the future, if your sect's disciples want to come to my sect's encampment to cultivate, just say the word. My sect's encampment will always be open to your disciples." With Siduhan's command, the group of people he brought with him immediately scattered around the profound Azure Palace's encampment. They looted everything they could and put it into their storage pouches. Those that couldn't be taken away were destroyed on the spot. As for Siduhan himself, he directly entered the Heaven's secret hall and stood in front of the Heaven's secret pillar. He used his status as a guardian to plunder the various blessings of the profound Azure Palace. Lu Yi continued to open the restrictions on his storage pouch while Feng Yu stayed behind to treat his injuries. It had to be said that after training in the Third Sacred Academy's encampment for the past few days, Feng Yu's cultivation and medical skills had greatly improved. Lu Yi casually chatted with her and knew that the Third Sacred Academy was very good to her, so he didn't blame her for what happened last time. After all, she was a medical cultivator, and a delicate one at that. No one would casually offend such a delicate medical cultivator. Moreover, the destruction of the Third Sacred Academy's encampment had nothing to do with her. It was the Myriad Devil Ridge's operation against Lu Yi. While the Myriad Devil Ridge's encampment was in full swing, the news of Lu Yi destroying the profound Azure Palace by himself quickly spread. Not everyone from the profound Azure Palace had died. In the end, about 30 people escaped through the Heaven's Secret Pillar. However, after this battle, more than 70% of the profound Azure Palace's core cultivators had been killed. Everyone's first reaction when they heard the news was that it was impossible. No matter how strong Lu Yi was, even if he had reached the 9th heaven realm. After the battle at the profound Azure Palace, his cultivation level on the spirit stream list had changed. However, even if he had reached the 9th heaven realm, it was impossible for him to destroy an entire sect by himself. Throughout history, this had never happened before. Even Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian didn't have such an ability. How could Lu Yi do it? After all, Feng Yuechan and Li Baxian had been in the spirit stream realm for more than 10 years. People constantly sent messages to the profound Azure Palace to inquire about the news and confirm the authenticity of the matter. In the end, they confirmed that it was true. The huge encampment of the profound Azure Palace had really been destroyed by Lu Yi single-handedly. According to the news, Lu Yi had relied on his own attainments in the Tao of Formations to break into the profound Azure Palace's encampment and started a massacre. Even if more than 80 people from the profound Azure Palace had set up a formation, they still couldn't stop him. Instead, their blood flowed like a river. This person's vile character and cruel methods were simply unheard of. He killed the core cultivators as if they were chickens. The entire 9 provinces was shaken. In the Spirit Stream battlefield, the Myriad Devil Ridge's forces in the core realm were all in danger. All the experts from the Myriad Devil Ridge who had confirmed the news couldn't help but be absent-minded. Before this, the Myriad Demon Ridge had already predicted that if Lu Yi was allowed to ascend to the heavenly 9th rank, the entire Spirit Stream battlefield would most likely be dominated by him alone. Even so, no one had expected that this guy would actually do something so outrageous after ascending to the heavenly 9th rank. Could it be that this huge Spirit Stream battlefield was really going to enter an era of one person's rule? Who in the Myriad Devil Ridge would be willing to accept this? Was there really no one who could deal with this guy who killed people like flies? Half a day later, another shocking piece of news came out. The Crescent Moon Pavilion's encampment, which wasn't far from the profound Azure Palace's encampment, had been destroyed. It was still Lu Yi, and he was still single-handedly doing it. The profound Azure Palace was a 3rd-grade force, and they didn't even have a Spirit Stream ranking expert in their encampment. The number of Heaven 9th Realm cultivators they had was also limited. If the profound Azure Palace's encampment was destroyed because their foundation wasn't strong enough, then the Crescent Moon Pavilion's encampment was destroyed because Lu Yi was strong enough. After all, the Crescent Moon Pavilion was a 1st-grade force. The sect had more Heaven 9th Realm cultivators than the profound Azure Palace, and they also had a Spirit Stream ranking expert in the 50s. Even so, after paying an extremely heavy price, the surviving cultivators of the Crescent Moon Pavilion could only be forced to retreat to the 9 states. Such a huge encampment had fallen into the hands of a single person. Overall, the Crescent Moon Pavilion's losses weren't too great. Because they had learned a lesson from the profound Azure Palace, they had set up a formation from the very beginning. When they retreated in the end, they had also retreated in an orderly manner. Even so, 30 to 40 people had still died. 34 good seedlings who could advance to the Cloud River tier at any time had been killed just like that. The higher-ups of the Crescent Moon Pavilion were heartbroken. When the profound Azure Palace's encampment had been destroyed, many of the myriad Devil Ridge's forces had still held on to the hope that it was because the profound Azure Palace was too weak. However, after the news of the Crescent Moon Pavilion's encampment being destroyed spread, these cultivators had no choice but to take Lu Ye seriously. Even the encampment of a first-grade sect couldn't stop this guy's slaughter. Looking at the entire Spirit Stream battlefield, who could stop him? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation P. The next day, the third encampment of the Myriad Devil Ridge was destroyed. It was near the profound Azure Palace and the Crescent Moon Pavilion. While the Myriad Devil Ridge's forces were furious, they were also shocked. Thinking back, when Lu Ye was stirring up trouble in the inner zone, he had to pull out the Grand Heaven Alliance's allied forces and rely on them to act. However, now that he was in the core zone, he didn't need any allied forces at all. Wherever he went, he could bring disaster to a sect. Lu Ye was fully deserving of the title of Sect Destroyer. As expected, there were only wrong names, but no wrong nicknames. At that time, in order to contain Lu Ye, the Myriad Devil Ridge had gathered a lot of people. While confronting the Grand Heaven Alliance's allied forces, they had asked the Divine Sea Realm cultivators to come forward and negotiate. In the end, they paid a lot of materials and settled the matter peacefully. However, now that Lu Ye was acting alone, it was really difficult for the Myriad Devil Ridge to deal with him. Of course, they could gather more people. However, Lu Ye's cultivation was at the 9th Heaven Realm and his speed was unparalleled. Who could catch up with him? If they couldn't catch up with him, what was the point of gathering more people? For a moment, many experts of the Myriad Devil Ridge had a headache. They were shocked to find that they didn't have any means to restrain Lu Ye. Unless they abandoned all the encampments, formed an army, and then wiped out the encampment of the Grand Heaven Alliance. If that was the case, then it would be their fault and no one would have a good ending. However, doing so would have no effect on Lu Ye. The encampment of the Jade Blood Sect was at the outermost part of the battlefield. The storm in the core zone wouldn't affect the Jade Blood Sect at all. Time flew by. In the core zone of the battlefield, the encampments of the sects were destroyed one after another. Even the encampments of the first-rank sects were as fragile as paper in front of Lu Ye. In the first few days, some sects didn't give up. They felt that the outside world had exaggerated Lu Ye's strength and tried to resist Lu Ye's attack with the advantage of numbers. However, after suffering losses, they all gave up their encampments and retreated to their own sects in the 9 states. Chapter 427. In just 10 days, more than 20 sects of the Myriad Devil Ridge in the core circle had been breached. On average, there were about 2 sects per day. In order to reduce the loss of people, some sects retreated to the 9 states when Lu Ye arrived and took away everything they could. However, the various blessings on the divine pillars could not be taken away and were plundered by Lu Ye to his heart's content. There were still some sects that stubbornly resisted. However, after being killed by Lu Ye several times and losing a large number of people, they recognized the reality. Now, in the Spirit Stream battlefield, there was really no one who could stop Lu Ye. All the sects of the Myriad Devil Ridge in the Spirit Stream battlefield, whether they were 1st grade, 2nd grade, or 3rd grade, were like naked girls placed in front of this guy, allowing him to ravage them. At this moment, the powerhouses of the Myriad Devil Ridge were horrified to discover that when a person was powerful to a certain extent, they could really do whatever they wanted. Riding on the momentum rolled up by Lu Ye, many sects of the Grand Sky Alliance were also ready to make a move. For a time, in the core circle of the battlefield, undercurrents surged, and there were signs that a shocking battle was about to break out. In the sky, Lu Ye ended the transmission with his 2nd senior sister and frowned. In the past 10 days, he had gained a lot. Not to mention that he could plunder a large number of blessings every time he breached a Myriad Devil Ridge encampment. He had also obtained a huge amount of spoils from killing the cultivators of the core circle. However, he had a faint feeling that if he continued to do this, something would happen. The greatest possibility was that the core circle would be completely chaotic. At that time, Whether it was the Myriad Devil Ridge or the Grand Sky Alliance, they would not have a good time. Therefore, he specially sent a message to his second senior sister and told her his concerns. Shui Yuan did not say too much. She only told him to act according to his heart and to have a clear conscience. The encampment in front of him was covered by a light screen. From the map, it was a second-grade sect called the Purple Gold Sect. The stream of light changed direction and landed outside the light screen of the large formation. At this moment, an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion stood quietly outside the light screen. This old man had a kind expression and gave people a very warm feeling. Looking at the young man who descended from the sky and landed in front of him, the old man smiled slightly. "Are you little friend Yi from the Jade Blood Sect?" Lu Yi put his hand on the hilt of his saber and looked up at him. With one look, he could tell that this old man was not a spirit stream stage cultivator. At such an old age, he was at least a true lake stage cultivator. Over the past 10 days, he had killed more than just spirit stream realm cultivators. A few sects had even sent out Cloud River True Lake realm cultivators. Because the original spirit stream realm cultivators were not enough to defend the encampment, they had no choice but to send out even more powerful cultivators. Of course, regardless of whether it was Yun He or Zhen who, after entering the spirit stream battlefield, the most powerful cultivator they could display was Tianjiu. It had to be said that these Cloud River True Lake stage experts had indeed brought Lu Yi quite a bit of trouble. In the battle 3 days ago, Lu Yi killed his way in and out of their sect encampment. Only then did his opponent's fighting spirit completely crumble. Therefore, Lu Yi wasn't surprised to see a white-haired old man here. His sharp gaze swept over the old man's vitals, wondering how many slashes it would take to kill him if he suddenly attacked. The old man's expression stiffened and he hurriedly said, "Little friend Yi, please don't be impatient. This old man is waiting here today not to make things difficult for you, but to discuss a business deal with you." Lu Yi remained silent and raised his gaze to look behind the old man at the 100 or so figures within the light screen of the grand formation. The old man laughed. "The little guy is just worried about this old man's safety, so he's keeping a close eye on me. Little friend, don't worry. Before this old man gives the order, they won't do anything to you. This is not the place to talk. If you trust this old man, please follow me." With that, the old man summoned his flying spirit artifact and flew off into the distance. Lu Yi looked at the old man and then at the 100 or so people within the light screen of the grand formation. His hand that was stroking the hilt of his saber loosened slightly and he followed the old man on his flying spirit artifact. Not long after, the old man and Lu Yi landed on a mountain peak several kilometers away from the encampment. Lu Yi scanned the surroundings with the support of spiritual runes in his eyes. There were no signs of an ambush or a formation. The old man stood on the mountain peak with one hand behind his back and looked down. He had a panoramic view of the Myriad Devil Ridge's encampment. Suddenly, he said, "The scenery here is good. Little friend, do you want to take a look together?" Lu Yi stepped forward and stood not far from the old man, looking down. "In your eyes, young friend, you should be able to see large amounts of merits and wealth. However, in my eyes, what I see is the result of the hard work of several generations of people in the Purple Gold Sect and the future of the Purple Gold Sect." The old man slowly said, "Of course, you and I belong to different camps and stand on different sides. Naturally, what we see is different. If you have something to say, then say it." Lu Yi said. The old man nodded and said, "Since little friend is a straightforward person, then this old man will not beat around the bush. Since the beginning of the profound Azure Palace's encampment until today, little friend has destroyed a total of 23 Myriad Devil Ridge forces in the past 10 days. The number of Myriad Devil Ridge cultivators who have died at little friend's hands is also several hundred. Indeed, with the strength and foundation that little friend has shown, even if the sects in the core region send us old men, we may not be able to stop little friend's slaughter. If little friend is willing, little friend can attack them one by one and destroy all the encampments of the Myriad Devil Ridge forces in the core region." This was the reality that the Myriad Devil Ridge had to face. If Lu Yi really wanted to, none of the Myriad Devil Ridge forces could keep their encampment. Don't say, but The old man was a little helpless by Lu Ye's words and could only say, "But little friend, have you thought about what would happen if little friend really did that?" Without waiting for Lu Yi to speak, the old man continued, "If that's really the case, then there will be countless heaven realm cultivators in the core region who have nothing to worry about. They don't need to protect their destroyed encampments. They can join forces and attack the other Grand Heaven Alliance encampments. If 100 people can't take them down, then 200 people. If 200 people can't take them down, then 300. There will always be a time when they can take them down. Little friend, this old man has observed that little friend is not the kind of person who acts recklessly and recklessly. You should be able to think of this result. Of course, if little friend destroys other people's encampments and kills all the enemies in them, then there will naturally be no hidden danger." The old man spoke methodically while Lu Yi listened expressionlessly. It had to be said that what the old man said was exactly what Lu Yi had been worried about recently. Ever since he entered the core region, he had been targeted in various ways by the myriad devil ridge. Before he had advanced to the 9th heaven, he had secretly made up his mind that when he advanced to the 9th heaven one day, he would take revenge on all the people who targeted him with interest. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Peach. However, after he advanced to the 9th heaven and really did it, he realized that he had thought too simply of things. The old man was right. Every time he took down a myriad devil ridge encampment, there would be another hidden danger in the core region unless he killed all the enemies when he took down the encampment. However, this was impossible. Now that Lu Ye's terrifying battle record was there, the cultivators of the myriad devil ridge would not dare to defend their encampments and have any direct conflict with him. The most likely situation was that every time Lu Yi went to a place, the cultivators of the myriad devil ridge would give up their encampments and retreat to the 9 states to preserve their strength. In this way, every time he took down a myriad devil ridge encampment, the hidden danger would increase. Once this hidden danger accumulated to the limit, it would definitely explode. By then, the entire core region would be embroiled in the flames of war. Without any worries, the cultivators of the myriad devil ridge would definitely band together and attack the encampments of the Grand Heaven Alliance. It was because of this layer of concern that he sent a message to his second senior sister, Shui Yuan, to ask what he should do next. However, Shui Yuan did not give him any clear instructions. Of course, little friend, if you only care about your own happiness and don't care about the consequences that Grand Sky Alliance might face in the future, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. My Violet Gold sect can't stop you. Although I'm a true lake stage cultivator, I'm not your opponent in the Spirit Stream battlefield. You can kill me and then attack the Violet Gold sect's base. My old bones should be worth a few hundred contribution points. Could Lu Yi ignore the consequences that the Grand Heaven Alliance might face in the future? Of course not. When his identity as a disciple of the Jade Blood sect was exposed, it was the many sects of the Grand Heaven Alliance that protected him. Previously, when he was rushing to the Forest of 1,000 Poisons, it was also the many cultivators of the Grand Heaven Alliance that protected him. This gave him enough time and energy to activate the Fire Phoenix spiritual pattern and break through the blockade of the myriad Devil Ridge cultivators. Since he was a member of the Grand Heaven Alliance, no matter what, he had to consider the pros and cons of the matter from the perspective of the Grand Heaven Alliance. If the people in the same camp were not united, then how could they fight against the people in the other camp? If something could benefit him but cause the entire camp to be in deep trouble, then he definitely could not do it. Otherwise, the disciples of the Jade Blood sect would have a hard time establishing themselves in the 9 regions. He was now the 5th senior brother of the Jade Blood sect in name, but in reality he was the eldest senior brother. Naturally, he had to consider his junior brothers and sisters. Little friend, if you don't kill this old man will continue speaking. The old man observed Lu Ye's expression and felt relieved. Knowing that Lu Yi had listened to him, he finally felt relieved. To be honest, although he looked calm, his heart was beating like a drum. After all, it took a lot of courage to stand together with the sect destroyer Yi. especially since the other party was young and vigorous and powerful. If he said something that made him unhappy, the other party might just cut him down. It was not strange for a hot-blooded young man to do something out of line. Now, it seemed that Lu Yi was quite reasonable. In the current situation, the strong are respected. There is only one rule in the cultivation world. Whoever has the bigger fist is right. The destruction of the 23 sex encampments has established your invincible position in the spirit stream battlefield. Everyone, including the myriad Devil Ridge, agrees with this. Chapter 428. If they were in the 9 prefectures, the elders' true lake stage cultivation could easily crush Lu Yi, who was in the spirit stream stage. However, this was the spirit stream battlefield. Even if he was in the spirit ocean stage, he would still have to consider Lu Ye's reaction before he spoke. It was truly tiring. In the spirit stream battlefield, you are invincible. Everyone will admit that. However, sometimes, you cannot do whatever you want just because you are strong. Get to the point. Lu Yi interrupted his chatter. The elder did not mind. He pondered for a moment and said, "If you are not going to attack my purple gold sect's encampment, my purple gold sect is willing to spend money to buy peace." Spending money to avoid disaster was the elder's ultimate goal in finding Lu Yi. "Name your price." Lu Ye's straightforwardness left the old man slightly stunned. He had originally prepared a speech to persuade Lu Yi with emotion and reason. 50,000 contribution points. Lu Yi turned to look at the elder. His aura gradually became dangerous. The elder's scalp went numb. He hurriedly said, "Calm down, my friend. Of course, if you attack my purple gold sect's encampment, you will get more than 50,000 contribution points. You will get more than 500,000. However, just like what I said just now, once my purple gold sect's encampment is destroyed, there will be a group of homeless people. They will definitely join forces with the other people whose encampments were destroyed and attack Grand Heaven Alliance's encampment together. I don't think you wish to see such a thing happen. Since we're talking about this as a business, of course, we have to take a step back. If you think that the purple gold sect's encampment is only worth 50,000 contribution points, then there is no need to talk nonsense." The elder smiled and said, "The purple gold sect's encampment is naturally worth more than 50,000 contribution points. The sect has worked hard for so many years. The amount of contribution points spent on the encampment is incalculable. If it is just my purple gold sect, we are willing to pay 500,000 contribution points, let alone 50,000. However, have you thought about how many sects there are in the core circle?" Lu Yi frowned. "What do you mean?" "In other words, if Little Friend agrees, the other sects of the Myriad Demon's Ridge should also be willing to pay 50,000 each. Little Friend, think about it, just how much wealth can you bring to Little Friend?" Seeing that Lu Yi was silent, the old man said, "Let me do a simple calculation for you. There are about 10 first-grade sects, 20 to 30 second-grade sects, and 40 to 50 third-grade sects in each of the 9 continents. Conservatively speaking, there are about 80 to 100 sects, and this is just one continent. There are about 800 to 1,000 third-grade sects and above in the 9 continents. If the Haotian Alliance and the Myriad Devil Ridge divide it equally, there will be 4 to 500 sects in the Myriad Devil Ridge. If each sect pays 50,000 merit points, you will get more than 20 million merit points. Do you still think it's too little?" Lu Yi was also shocked by the old man's calculations. 20 to 30 million merit points? What kind of abundant resources would that be? One must know that his mountain pan saber was only worth 138 merit points when he bought it from the Tianji treasure house. Among the 9 restrictions spiritual weapons, this was already considered quite expensive. As for the body replenishing pill, it was only worth 160,000 merit points. 20 to 30 million merit points could buy hundreds of them. Of course, the Tianji treasure house was almost out of stock, and there were only a few left. So, Little Friend, don't think that my purple gold sect is offering too little. The 50,000 merit points is the result of my careful consideration. If Little Friend's price is too high, which sect of the Myriad Demon's Ridge would dare to give it to you? At that time, perhaps the myriad demons Ridge would rather give up their encampment than give away so much wealth. What if they end up raising a monster? Are you sure that the other sects of the myriad demons Ridge are willing to pay to avoid disaster? Lu Yi asked. The old man stroked his beard and smiled. Last time, little friend caused some trouble in the inner circle. Didn't the myriad demons Ridge use this method to settle the matter? Compared to the loss of their encampment, what is giving up some wealth? You should know that every encampment in the inner circle is the result of the hard work of several generations, or even more than 10 generations. Lu Yi nodded. Although the old man did not say it explicitly, Lu Yi could vaguely guess that the myriad demons Ridge had reached some consensus. This old man seemed to be negotiating with him on behalf of the Purple Gold sect, but in fact, the entire myriad demons Ridge was behind him. His proposal of paying to avoid disaster should be the best solution that the myriad demons Ridge could accept at the moment. It was not impossible. Lu Yi had been worried that if he continued to attack the myriad demons Ridge encampment like this, it might be difficult to clean up the mess. He did not want to implicate the other Grand Heaven Alliance forces. If the myriad demons Ridge chose to pay to avoid disaster, his gains would be much smaller, but it would not cause too much trouble and chaos. Speaking of which, the merit points he obtained now would be converted into merit points for the sect. It could not be compared to the wealth that could be used in cultivation. The Jade Blood sect's need for merit points was not so urgent now. The heaven and earth spirit energy in the encampment had been raised to the limit. Even if they had more merit points, it would only expand the encampment's range. However, if they could obtain cultivation resources, the disciples would grow faster. It was a good deal. 800,000 merit points for a third-rank sect, 200,000 for a second-rank sect, and 300,000 for a first-rank sect. Since the myriad demons Ridge wanted to do business this time, they could not blame him for raising the price. Naturally, he could not agree to the old man's proposal of 50,000 merit points for each sect. That was a condition offered by someone else, and he had his own conditions. In fact, 50,000 merit points was a lot of wealth. Just a 9 restrictions spirit weapon like the Mountain Pan Saber alone was enough to buy a few hundred of them. However, compared to the huge amount of merit points that the sects spent on their encampments, what was 100,000, 200,000, or 300,000? Lu Yi believed that his asking price was very fair and that the sects of the myriad demons Ridge could accept it. Young friend, the old man hurriedly said. However, Li did not give him a chance. He took out a map and chose a location. I will wait for you at the Heavenly Sword Peak for 10 days. After 10 days, if any sect does not give me the wealth I need, I will personally visit them. As soon as he finished speaking, he took out his spirit boat and soared into the sky. Young friend, the old man shouted, but Lu Yi ignored him. The old man could only watch as Lu Yi disappeared at the end of his line of sight. After half an hour, Lu Yi's conditions had spread throughout the core sects of the myriad demons Ridge. Many people jumped and cursing Lu Yi for being insatiably greedy. As the old man had said, if each sect offered 50,000 merit points, the Jade Blood sect would be able to obtain 20 to 30 million merit points in the end. If Lu Yi's conditions were given, the value of the treasures that would fall into the hands of the Jade Blood sect would be terrifying. After a rough calculation, it would be worth 50 to 60 million merit points. 20 to 30 million merit points would be enough to transform the entire Jade Blood sect. How much would 50 to 60 million merit points be? It was unimaginable. The hot-tempered old man even clamored for Lu Yi to destroy all the encampments of the myriad demons Ridge's forces. Then, everyone would join forces to deal with the Grand Sky Alliance's encampment. No one would have an easy time. But in the end, it was just clamoring, just as the old man from the Purple Gold sect had said. Each sect's encampment in the core circle was the result of several generations of hard work. The amount of merit points spent on the encampment was incalculable. Now, they only needed 100,000 merit points, 200,000 merit points, or even 300,000 merit points to avoid disaster. It was actually acceptable, but some people just couldn't get over it. The 23 sects that had their encampments destroyed were about to cry. If only Lu Yi had proposed this condition earlier. Their encampments had already been destroyed. If they wanted to rebuild their encampments, who knew how many years of hard work it would take? No one had ever thought that a spirit stream realm cultivator could create such a huge amount of wealth. Including the compensation that the Myriad Demons Ridge had given to the Grand Sky Alliance, the Myriad Demons Ridge had lost too much because of Luya. The Heavenly Sword Peak was located in the center of the Spirit Stream battlefield. It was also the center of the core circle. The entire Spirit Mountain was like a sharp sword that had fallen from the sky, towering over the earth. The Spirit Mountain was thousands of blades high and rugged. The reason why Luya chose the Heavenly Sword Peak to make a deal with the various factions of the Myriad Demons Ridge was because it was located in the middle. No matter which faction of the Myriad Demons Ridge came from, 10 days would be enough. If they didn't come after 10 days, it was obvious that they didn't agree with the method of spending money to avoid disaster. At that time, there would be no need to be polite with them. They could just directly destroy their encampments. Luya spent 2 days rushing from the Purple Gold Sect to the Heavenly Sword Peak. There were actually people on the Lone Peak. They were 2 women. They seemed to be comprehending nature and cultivating in peace. Hearing the commotion, they opened their eyes and suddenly felt that Luya looked somewhat familiar. After carefully identifying him, they were instantly shocked. It was actually Luya of the Jade Blood Sect. The 2 women only hated themselves for being so unlucky. They actually bumped into this jinx while cultivating at the Heavenly Sword Peak. They instantly trembled. The slightly older senior sister whispered, "This is bad. What should we do now?" The other woman said weakly, "Fight it out with him? We can't beat him. He's killed so many people recently." The senior sister shook her head. "Then what should we do?" The junior sister's voice carried a sobbing tone. "Why don't junior sister go and seduce him?" The senior sister suggested. "Seduce? Seduce him with what?" His expression looked so scary. The junior sister's face was filled with confusion. "Idiot, of course we'll use breasts. I heard that he likes women with big breasts the most. Do you know by Lon on the Spirit Stream list? It's because she's big enough that she escaped from him. Junior sister, you have a lot of capital. You can definitely do it." "Huh." The junior sister obviously heard this for the first time and found it hard to accept. Suddenly, she saw Luya turn his head to look at her, and her face suddenly turned pale. The senior sister hurriedly patted her back, and the junior sister immediately puffed out her chest. The corners of her eyes twitched, and she squeezed out a smile. Before she could say anything, she saw Luya indifferently glance at her and lightly spit out a word, "Scram." Perhaps because he had killed too many people recently, he didn't have any killing intent. The 2 women were stunned for a moment, then hurriedly took out their spirit tools and rushed into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. After flying for a long time, the junior sister patted her chest. "That scared me to death." The senior sister said, "As expected, this guy likes big and round. Damn it." Chapter 429. On the Heavenly Sword Peak, Lu Yi sat cross-legged with the mountain saber on his knees. He held the hilt of the saber with both hands with his palms facing up. As he breathed in and out, his body and mind intersected with the saber. He had already stayed here for 3 days, and he had released the conditions to the major factions of the Myriad Devil Ridge for 5 days. However, until today, no cultivators from the Myriad Devil Ridge had appeared. However, Lu Ye's powerful perception could sense that there were many ghost cultivators hiding in the shadows. Lu Yi originally thought that these ghost cultivators were here to kill him, but now it seemed that it was not the case. If they were really here to kill him, they would have made a move long ago. He had revealed a lot of flaws in the past few days. Didn't the Myriad Devil Ridge want to kill him? Of course they did. However, none of the ghost cultivators dared to act rashly. Lu Yi had already offered the corresponding conditions to the major sects in the core circle of the Myriad Devil Ridge. As long as those sects could pay a certain price, they could spend money to avoid disaster. At such a sensitive time, which ghost cultivator would dare to act rashly? It would be good if they could kill Lu Yi, but if they failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Therefore, Lu Yi could roughly guess the thoughts of these ghost cultivators. Some of these ghost cultivators hiding in the shadows should have been sent by the major sects of the myriad Devil Ridge to monitor his movements. Some of them might have brought a lot of treasures with them and were prepared to spend money to avoid disaster. However, the time limit was not up yet, so they were not in a hurry to hand over the treasures. Another point was that none of these ghost cultivators were willing to be the first to hand over the treasures. They were all waiting for others to act. After all, this was not something to be proud of. There were still 5 days before the time limit given by Lu Yi. There was no rush. As time passed, the number of ghost cultivators who rushed to the Heavenly Sword Peak and hid in the shadows to observe Lu Yi increased. At the same time, the Tianji Business Alliance released an interesting piece of news. At some point in time, there was another Overlord-level demon beast, and it was a demoness who could transform into a human form. It was different from the Overlord-level demon beasts that were currently recorded. This demoness did not have a fixed territory. Instead, she wandered around the core circle. She seemed to be looking for something. In fact, as early as 2 months ago, the Tianji Business Alliance had already observed this demoness. However, she did not appear many times during this period of time. However, the demoness appeared more and more frequently. This attracted the attention and vigilance of many people. As for what she was looking for, no one knew. The only thing worth rejoicing over was that this demoness did not seem to have much malice towards the cultivators. As long as he did not take the initiative to provoke her, she also wouldn't do anything to the cultivators. According to the observations of the experts of the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance, this demoness was the human form of a fire-type demonic beast. Its true form should be a fire fong. As for her background, it was very likely that it came from the Land of Fire. This was because the Land of Fire was a forbidden zone for cultivators. It was the most suitable habitat for fire-type demonic beasts. Several months ago, the Land of Fire had slowly disappeared. Therefore, the Heavenly Secret Business Alliance deduced this demoness should have lived in the Land of Fire, but now that the Land of Fire had disappeared for some unknown reason, she had lost her territory and was looking for a place to stay. When the news spread, all the major sects were tempted. A demoness that could transform into a human form could be accepted into the sect. If that was the case, then that would undoubtedly be a great help to the sect. With such an overlord-level demoness overseeing the base, who would dare to cause trouble? Why had the Jade Blood sect's base been so impregnable all these years that no one dared to invade? Wasn't it because there was an overlord-level demonic beast overseeing it? Several sects' cultivators had already tried to make contact with the demoness, but without exception, all of them had failed. It wasn't until the demoness flew past the Heavenly Sword Peak that she suddenly seemed to have discovered something and landed in front of Lu Yi. A pair of fiery red eyes stared at Lu Yi as she spat out a few unclear words. Found it. Lu Yi, who was cultivating and reading a book, looked up and saw that it was this fellow. He felt a headache coming on. Why are you here? He didn't expect that he would actually see this overlord-level demoness again. And from the other party's words, it seemed that she was looking for him. The ghost cultivators hiding in the dark were all shocked. No one knew. How did Lu Yi get involved with an overlord-level demoness? And from the looks of it, the relationship between the two seemed to be not simple. I'm looking for you, the demoness said. What's the matter? I can't find the fire. Then it's gone. It would be strange if she could find it. The true phoenix fire had long been devoured by the talent tree, and now it had become his fire phoenix spirit mark. However, the demoness' persistence was admirable. It had been so long, but she was still looking for the fire. The demoness shook her head. It's impossible that it's gone. Take me to find it. As she spoke, she reached out to grab Lu Yi, regardless of whether he was willing or not. Lu Yi was naturally unwilling. Not to mention that the true phoenix fire was gone. Even if it was, he didn't want to have anything to do with an overlord-level demonic beast. It was too insecure. His figure flashed, and he dodged the other party's grab. Lu Yi said, "Why don't you look for it more carefully?" "I can't find it." The demoness shook her head and insisted. "Take me there." She reached out to grab Lu Yi again. Lu Yi frowned and suddenly unsheathed his pan-mountain saber. The saber flashed, and the demoness sharply retracted her hand. Her red eyes narrowed slightly, and her expression became unfriendly. "Don't touch me. When others are talking to you, you have to listen carefully." Lu Yi placed his saber in front of him and said seriously, "I want that fire." The demoness' expression became impatient. Her 10 fingers quickly sharpened like claws, and fiery red demonic chi roiled around her body. The ghostly cultivators hiding in the shadows were dumbfounded. They had originally thought that Lu Ye had an unusual relationship with this overlord-level demonic beast. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come looking for them so directly. But now, it seemed that their relationship wasn't ordinary. However, it seemed like they were enemies. There was going to be a good show to watch. Lu Yi rubbed the hilt of his saber with his thumb and lowered his eyes slightly. "Don't pester me endlessly. I have hundreds of brothers behind me. If you dare to act impudently, you might not be able to leave here alive today." The female demon's sharp gaze immediately swept the surroundings. Under her gaze, the ghost cultivators who were hiding in the dark immediately turned pale with fright, as if they had been stripped naked. They knew in their hearts that their whereabouts had long been discovered by Lu Ye. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, a series of piercing sounds rang out as the ghostly cultivators in hiding revealed themselves. They summoned their spirit tools and fled in all directions. The demoness turned to look at Lu Yi. Lu Yi had already slashed his saber at her. He had fought this demoness twice before, so Lu Yi knew that even though she was strong, she was lacking in intelligence. This kind of simple-minded person was usually very stubborn. Since she had been looking for him and wanted him to take her to the true Phoenix Fire, she wouldn't give up so easily. So if he wanted her to back off, he would have to fight her. When Lu Yi had first encountered her in the Land of Fire, her cultivation was only at the Heaven Level 7. At that time, Lu Yi had been injured in a short exchange. But now, things were different. Lu Yi was now at the Heaven Level 9 and had undergone the baptism of Heaven's bestowment 3 times. With his strength alone, he was able to suppress the entire myriad demon mountain range. He didn't know if he could defeat this demoness, but only by being strong enough would he have the right to talk to her as an equal. This was the unchanging truth of the demonic beast circle. In the face of this saber strike, the demoness' body was so light that it seemed weightless. She lightly floated back and dodged. But what she faced next was a torrential storm of saber light. Lu Ye had started fighting with the Overlord-class demoness on the Heavenly Sword Peak. The news spread like wildfire. In less than the time it took to brew a cup of tea, it spread across the entire Spirit Stream battlefield and then to the Kingdom of the 9 States. The powerful cultivators of the myriad demon mountain range were all shocked, and they almost threw their heads back and howled with laughter. This was truly a case of self-destruction. Although she didn't know why Lu Ye wanted to fight with that Overlord-class demoness, she was still an Overlord-class existence. No matter how strong Lu Ye was, could he be her opponent? The cultivators of the myriad demon mountain range, who hated Lu Yi to the core, felt like they could already see him dying at the hands of the demoness. They could only wait to celebrate. According to the information provided by the ghostly cultivators present, the Overlord-class demoness had come straight for Lu Yi. When she had appeared, she had said, "I've found you." Afterwards, her conversation with Lu Yi had involved a ball of fire or something of the sort. In any case, the man and the demoness were already locked in a fierce battle. The ghostly cultivators were all watching from afar, constantly passing on the latest news. The powerful cultivators of the myriad demon mountain range were all secretly praying that the demoness would unleash her invincible might and kill Lu Ye. As long as he was dead, the Spirit Stream battlefield would be peaceful in the future, and the myriad demon mountain range wouldn't have to hand over the treasures they had prepared. However, as the news continued to spread, the myriad demon mountain range's earnest expectations were doused with a bucket of cold water, that Lu Ye's strength was beyond imagination. He could actually fight an Overlord-level existence to such an extent, exchanging blows back and forth. Near the Heavenly Sword Peak, 2 figures were constantly crisscrossing. One was Lu Yi, who had activated the flying wing spirit pattern, and the other was the demoness who had grown a pair of wings. Both figures were extremely agile, colliding from time to time. The confrontation of spirit power and demonic power dyed the sky red. In terms of speed, Lu Yi was not inferior to the demoness at all. In terms of strength, they were even on par. In terms of means, Lu Yi was even stronger than the demoness. News of the battle continued to be passed on by the ghostly cultivators who were secretly watching the battle. The originally lively Myriad Demon Mountain Range camp was dead silent. The Myriad Demon Mountain Range realized an extremely terrifying fact. To be able to fight so fiercely with an overlord-class existence, Lu Yi undoubtedly had the strength of an overlord-class existence. This was the first time since ancient times that a cultivator had ascended to the position of an overlord-class existence. This battle lasted from day to night, and from night to day. The battle between the man and the demoness shifted from the ground to the sky, and from the sky to the ground. After a full day and night, the battle finally came to an end. Chapter 430. On the Heavenly Sword Peak, Lu Yi was bare-chested and covered in wounds. He was cleaning his wounds, applying medicinal herbs, and carefully bandaging them. Although the battle with the demoness had been difficult, he had fought to his heart's content. With his current strength, there was no one in the entire Spirit Stream battlefield who could be his match. Before he had ascended to the heavenly rank, Lan Zi might have been able to fight him. However, after he had ascended to the heavenly rank, even Lan Zi had to step aside. In the past 2 months, Lan Zi, who was ranked second on the Spirit Stream list, had not challenged him. This was the best proof. The only ones who could fight him were the overlord-level existences. There was no winner or loser in this battle. It could be said that both sides were winners and losers. Both he and the demoness had suffered different degrees of injuries. At the end of the battle, both of them were about to run out of oil. After the battle, the demoness quickly left. Although she was not very smart, she knew that it was not suitable for her to show her face in front of others in her current state. Who knew where she was hiding to recuperate? Lu Yi did not leave. He had to wait here for the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge to deliver the items. Under the night sky, the sound of someone stepping on dried leaves could be heard. Hooper immediately entered a state of alert. He also looked around vigilantly. Lu Yi sat cross-legged and held the mountain pan saber. This was his weakest moment. If the people from the Myriad Devil Ridge really wanted to kill him, this was the best time to do so. A figure appeared not far in front of Lu Yi. Judging by his attire, it was obviously a ghost cultivator. The ghost cultivator stood 10 feet away from Lu Yi and cupped his fists. Then he raised his hand and threw a bulging storage pouch at Lu Yi. Yi raised her hand and caught it. When she looked up again, the ghost cultivator had disappeared. From the beginning to the end, that person had not said a word, nor did he reveal his background. He thought for a moment and quickly opened the storage pouch. She found a jade token from the storage pouch. There were 3 large words engraved on the jade token. It was the name of a force from the Myriad Devil Ridge in the core circle. Lu Yi said softly, and Lu Yi nodded slightly, indicating that she understood. After the first ghost cultivator appeared, more and more ghost cultivators appeared one after another. They threw a storage pouch at Lu Yi from afar and then fled without a word. Spending money to avoid calamity was not something to be proud of, so the ghost cultivators who came to hand over their belongings all remained silent. In any case, there was information left in the storage bags, so Lu Yi would know which sect had given the items and which had not. A moment later, storage pouches were thrown out from all directions like rain. He didn't have time to collect them. Many of the ghost cultivators who came to deliver the goods didn't even show their faces. They just threw out their storage bags from afar. After confirming that Lu Yi had collected them, their mission was considered complete. At this time, there were still 3 days left until the 10-day deadline that Lu Yi had set. Originally, the ghost cultivators who had come to deliver the supplies had made up their minds to wait until the last day. However, after the battle between Lu Yi and the demoness, the Myriad Demon Ridge had completely lost their temper. The current Lu Yi was already publicly acknowledged as a cultivator that had ascended to the position of an overlord, creating an unprecedented precedent. Which sect in the myriad Devil Ridge would dare act rashly? What's more, there were also the previous examples of 23 sects being destroyed. Originally, some sects were prepared to bargain with Lu Yi to see if they could pay less. After all, even for a first-grade sect, it was not easy to take out 300,000 merit points at once. But now, they couldn't say anything. In the face of an overlord, spending money to buy safety was something they could accept. By daybreak, there were as many as 400 to 500 storage pouches in front of Lu Yi. He was a little dizzy. Looking at the storage pouches, she murmured, "Lu Yi, we're rich." "We're rich." Lu Yi nodded heavily. After handing over the 10-point map to Yi, she would be in charge of checking the valuables. Checking the markings on the map to see if the myriad Demon Ridge factions had handed over enough valuables was a tedious task. Yi was the most suitable person for this task. After all, Lu Yi still had to recuperate. "By the way, leave the storage pouch of the Wild Blade sect." Lu Yi ordered again. 3 days later, Lu Ye's injuries were more or less healed. The items in the hundreds of storage pouches were also counted and sorted out by Yi, putting all the different types of belongings together. Even if they were carefully organized, the items in the hundreds of storage pouches couldn't be packed into a single storage pouch. There were too many things. In the end, there were still nearly 30 storage pouches, each filled to the brim. Lu Yi couldn't help but frown. With so many storage pouches hanging on his body, it was more or less an eyesore. Moreover, it would affect his fighting ability. But there was no way around it. How many people could understand the troubles of being rich? However, according to Yi's 10-point map, except for the 23 sects that Lu Yi had destroyed, all the other sects in the myriad Demon Ridge had delivered goods. Not a single one was left out. "This is from the Wild Blade sect." Yi handed a separate storage pouch to Lu Yi. Opening it, Lu Yi saw all sorts of things inside. There were pills, spirit stones, spirit weapons, and herbs. Lu Yi couldn't estimate the value of all of them, but the Wild Blade sect was a first-grade sect in Dingzhou. Since they had chosen to pay for it, the value of the items in the pouch should be at least 300,000 merit points. "Do you think there's 300,000 merit points in here?" Lu Yi asked. "I think so." Yi wasn't sure either. She had a faint feeling that Lu Yi was up to no good. "If you can't be sure, then there's none." Lu Yi was suddenly filled with killing intent. The Wild Blade sect sure has guts. It seems they don't want their base anymore. Yi's eyes twitched. "What are you going to do?" She didn't know why Lu Yi was targeting the Wild Blade sect. To the Wild Blade sect. Lu Yi stood up, took out his flying spirit weapon, and soared into the sky. Half a day later, Lu Ye's figure landed in front of the Wild Blade sect's base. Immediately, a Wild Blade sect cultivator sensed the commotion and came to investigate. He immediately saw a young man with a ring of storage pouches hanging from his waist. The cultivator was stunned when he saw the storage pouches hanging from his abdomen all the way to the back of his waist. He had never seen a person carry so many storage pouches around. Lu Ye's current state was just short of the word "rich" engraved on his forehead. Looking at the young man's face, the cultivator's expression changed drastically. Lu Yi ignored him and activated the Insight Spirit mark to observe the formation nodes in front of him, then threw out a few formation flags. "Lu Yi, what are you doing?" The cultivator couldn't help but shout. It was rumored that Lu Yi had a unique skill when it came to breaking through formations. The sects that had been attacked by him first had their bases infiltrated by him using special methods and slaughtered. So when he saw Lu Yi's actions, the cultivator panicked. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Yi had already lifted a corner of the grand formation and walked in leisurely. The cultivator immediately took a few steps back and raised his hand to grab his spirit weapon. Although he was terrified, he shouted, "Lu Yi is attacking!" In an instant, the entire Wild Blade sect's base was in an uproar. Figures flew over from all directions and stood dozens of feet in front of Lu Yi, waiting for him. As expected of a first-grade sect's base, the response was extremely fast. In less than 10 breaths of time after the person shouted, dozens of people had gathered. Although they had heard of Lu Yi, it was the first time they had seen him in person. They couldn't help but look up and down and didn't see anything special about him. However, the identity of an overlord-level existence couldn't be ignored. So even if the Wild Blade sect had a large number of people, the cultivators were still nervous. On the other hand, Lu Yi, who had broken into the defensive formation alone, was very calm. A man with a decent appearance stepped out and asked in a deep voice, "Lu Yi, what do you want by breaking into my Wild Blade sect's base?" Those who could stand out and speak at this time were either the guardian or the deputy. The others didn't have the qualifications to do so. Lu Yi threw the storage bag in his hand to the man. The man caught it and opened it with a frown. He quickly put it away with an ugly expression. "What's the meaning of this?" This storage bag was clearly passed through his hands to a ghost cultivator in the sect and then sent to the Sky Sword Peak. It was also the property worth 300,000 merit points that the Wild Blade sect paid for it. Lu Yi suddenly returned the storage bag untouched. Obviously, he didn't come with good intentions. "It's not enough. Have you checked it carefully?" The man gritted his teeth. It was impossible that it wasn't enough. This matter was handled by him and a true lake stage elder, so he knew better than anyone what was in the storage bag and how much it was worth. Since they chose to pay to avoid disaster, the Wild Blade sect naturally wouldn't skimp on the property. That would undoubtedly be asking for trouble. "You can sell it to the Tianji treasure house now and see if it's worth 300,000 merit points." Lu Yi looked at him expressionlessly. Although he didn't know the exact value of the property, he was sure that it wouldn't be worth 300,000 merit points if he sold it to the Tianji treasure house. This was because the price of buying and selling from the Tianji treasure house was completely different. The difference was almost double. The man's expression changed. "You're using this method to calculate?" If this was the case, then they would have to pay an equivalent amount of property. This was too much. Is there a problem? It wasn't just a problem, it was a big problem. Moreover, as far as he knew, the other factions in the Myriad Devil Ridge paid based on the price of what they bought from the Tianji treasure house and not the value of what they sold. The man was so angry that he laughed. "Lu Yi, don't be greedy. Are you scolding me?" Lu Yi stared at him. "I'm not." As soon as he finished speaking, his expression changed greatly. Lu Yi's figure suddenly appeared in front of him, leaving behind afterimages. The man hurriedly took out his spiritual weapon to block. With a boom, the huge force sent the man flying. He fell into the crowd and staggered to his feet, blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth. His face was full of shock. One had to know that he was ranked in the 20s on the spirit stream list, but he couldn't even block a normal attack from Lu Yi. Today's matter can't be solved without 20 pieces of saber cultivation experience. Lu Yi's voice slowly sounded. Chapter 431. Third senior brother Shaoxing's saber cultivation experience was of great help to Lu Yi. After all, his third senior brother was only in the true lake stage. Ever since Lu Yi obtained the saber cultivation experience, he had been thinking that it would be great if he had more saber cultivation experience. However, in the entire 9 prefectures, the Haotian Alliance didn't have a sect that was famous for saber cultivation. There was one sword cultivation sect, the North Profound Sword Sect in the War Province. Therefore, all the sword cultivators in the 9 prefectures liked to go to the North Profound Sword Sect to cultivate and improve their sword cultivation. Since Lu Yi was a saber cultivator, there was no point in going to the North Profound Sword Sect. However, he couldn't go to the Wild Saber Sect. The Wild Saber Sect belonged to the Wanmo Ridge. If he dared to go there, he wouldn't even be able to see the moon tonight, let alone the sun tomorrow. Even if he couldn't go to the Wild Saber Sect's main sect, he could at least go to the Wild Saber Sect's encampment in the Spirit Stream battlefield. He didn't expect the experts of the Wild Saber Sect to personally teach him anything. He could just give 20 sets of saber cultivation experience like his third senior brothers. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to the Wild Saber Sect. There were hundreds of sects in the Wanmo Ridge. After he said that, the cultivators of the Wild Saber Sect finally understood Lu Yi's intention, saying that the value of the items in the storage bag was less than 300,000 merit points was all bullshit. The real reason he came here was to ask for saber cultivation experience. Inside the light curtain of the grand array, seeing that their guardian had been injured by Lu Yi with a single blow, some people couldn't hold back and rushed towards Lu Yi. Lu Yi lowered his eyes and pointed his saber at the ground. Spiritual energy surged and the saber was surrounded by flames. "Stop!" the man shouted angrily. Seeing that his cultivator stopped, he let out a sigh of relief. He couldn't let his cultivator fight with Lu Yi. If the battle started, many of them would die. The Xianqing Palace was a good example. The first encampment that Lu Yi attacked in the core circle was the Xianqing Palace. In that battle, the Xianqing Palace lost 70 to 80% of its cultivators. It took a long time for them to recover. Although the Wild Blade Sect's grade was higher than the Profound Azure Palaces, the overall strength of the Spirit Stream Realm cultivators wasn't much stronger than the Profound Azure Palaces. If Lu Yi could kill 70% of the cultivators from the Dark Azure Palace, he could also kill 70% of the cultivators from the Wild Saber Sect. If that happened, they wouldn't even be able to protect their own base. After taking a deep breath, the man said, "Lu Yi, don't go too far. If you can't make the decision, then go find someone who can. I still have something important to do, so I'll wait for an hour. If you don't give me a satisfactory answer after an hour, I'll destroy your Mad Blade sect." The man stared deeply at Lu Yi for a long time before he turned around and said a few words to the people around him before leaving in a hurry. He really couldn't make the decision on such a big matter. He had to return to the 9 regions and ask for instructions from the powerhouses in the sect. Lu Yi sheathed the Panshan saber in his hand and placed the scabbard in front of him. He put his hands on the hilt and closed his eyes to rest, waiting. A group of cultivators from the Wild Saber sect confronted him from several hundred feet away, but because of the order of the Guardian before he left, no one dared to act rashly. They could only glare at Lu Yi with hatred, venting their grievances and anger with their eyes. There were also some people who looked at Lu Yi curiously. After all, they had heard of Lu Yi's name many times, but this was the first time they saw him in person. Time passed by slowly. Suddenly, a valiant female cultivator walked out of the crowd with a cup of tea in her hands and offered it to Lu Yi. "Honored guest, please have some tea." Lu Yi opened his eyes and looked at her condescendingly. The corner of the female cultivator's mouth raised into a mocking smile. "You don't dare?" They couldn't beat Lu Yi, but if they didn't fight back after being bullied in front of their door, they wouldn't be fearless swordsmen. Before the Guardian left, he told them not to get into a conflict with Lu Yi. Just offering tea naturally didn't count as a conflict, and this was also the way to treat a guest. But no matter who stood in Lu Yi's position, they wouldn't dare to drink this cup of tea casually. Who knew if it was poisoned or not? The female cultivator just wanted to use this method to silently fight back and dispel Lu Yi's arrogance. If Lu Yi didn't dare to take the tea, then the name of Lu Yi the coward would definitely spread in the future. Anyway, this guy had a lot of nicknames, so one more wouldn't matter. Just as the female cultivator was thinking this, Lu Yi raised his hand and took the cup of tea, tilting his head back and drinking it. Who cares if it's poisonous or not, it can't kill him. The corner of the female cultivator's eyes twitched. There was no poison in the tea, but she really didn't expect Lu Yi to be so bold. She secretly regretted it. If she had known, she would have put some poison in the tea. Maybe she would have poisoned this guy to death, and that would have been a great merit. Now it seemed like she really came to serve tea to Lu Yi. In less than half an hour, the man who had left earlier returned. Parting the crowd, he stood in front of the cultivators. Before he could speak, Lu Yi spoke first. "We don't accept any bargaining. Your Wild Saber sect has been passed down for so many years, and there are countless experts who use sabers. 20 sets of saber technique cultivation notes are nothing to you." The man couldn't say the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Before they came, the elders of the sect had given clear instructions to bargain with Lu Yi as much as possible to see if they could give less of their saber cultivation experience. Although these things were not unique, giving them to Lu Yi would be like giving support to the enemy. Naturally, they would give as little as they could and not give as much as they could. This was different from the property they gave before, but Lu Yi had obviously expected this, so he directly blocked them, leaving the Wild Saber sect with no chance at all. Taking a deep look at Lu Yi, the man raised his hand and threw out a storage bag, which Lu Yi caught. There was no restriction lock on the storage bag, so he reached in and took out handwritten letters from it. He randomly chose one and opened it. The ink on it was not completely dry, so it should have just been copied. Glancing at the content, he confirmed that it was indeed Saber Technique Cultivation Notes. He checked several books in a row, but there was no big problem. Only then did Lu Yi carefully put away the Saber Technique Cultivation Notes. Looking up at the man, he stretched out his hand and said, "The thing." The man's face darkened. "What thing? What else?" Lu Yi said matter-of-factly, "The thing I gave you at the beginning." The man looked at Lu Yi in shock. "You still want to go back?" "Nonsense." Lu Yi was expressionless. "That's the money your Wild Saber sect used to buy peace. Of course, if you don't want this peace, I don't care." The man was so angry that his liver hurt. He took the storage bag from his waist and threw it directly to Lu Yi. Lu Yi put it away and said, "Do you want me to leave by myself, or do you want to let me go?" "Open the array." The man shouted. Even if they didn't let him go, he could still leave, so why bother? Although he was angry in his heart, the most important thing now was to send this god of plague away as soon as possible. A gap opened in the array, and Lu Yi rushed into the sky and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Looking in the direction Lu Yi left, the cultivators of the Wild Saber sect all clenched their fists, endless humiliation and anger surging in their hearts. Flying into the air, Lu Yi checked the 10-point map and flew in the direction of Myriad Poison Forest according to the map's guidance. The matters of the core circle were almost settled. Of the sects of Myriad Demon Ridge, except for the 23 sects that he had broken through before, all of them had paid the peace fee, so Lu Yi couldn't cause any more trouble. He was ready to return to the Blue Blood sect. He was still the guardian of the Blue Blood sect, so he had to transfer the guardian position to the right person before he was promoted to Cloud River Realm. Moreover, he had broken through the 23 sects' encampments and plundered a lot of blessings, so he had to return to the sect to deal with it. In addition, he had too many storage pouches on him, which were worth 50 to 60 million merit points. He had to send them back to the sect and give them to Shui Yuan. With so many things on him, Lu Yi didn't feel at ease. There were still 10 days until the baptism of the Heaven's secret reward. According to his previous experience and Lu Ye's estimation, after this time, the spirit mist in the Heaven's secret pool shouldn't be of much help to him. His cultivation had reached the end of the spirit stream realm, and he had obtained all the benefits he wanted. Besides one more thing, there was no need to stay in the spirit stream battlefield. The reason he was going to Myriad Poison Forest was naturally to leave some cultivation resources for Hua Ci. After confirming the direction, he was flying when the battlefield imprint suddenly sent him a message. Lu Yi checked and found that it was from his second senior sister Shui Yuan. "Before you advance to Cloud River Realm, return to the sect." Got it. Lu Yi didn't know why his second senior sister had told him this, but he had planned to return to the encampment anyway. 2 days later, Lu Yi entered Myriad Poison Forest and appeared in front of the wooden house. He didn't see Hua Ci, so she should be cultivating somewhere. Lu Yi didn't look for her. He went to the 3rd floor, lay down on the bed, and fell into a deep sleep. Looking at the entire Spirit Stream battlefield, this was the only place where he could completely relax. Even in the encampment, it wasn't as reassuring as this place. It was a pity that he couldn't stay here forever. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, he was awakened by a fragrance and laughter. When Lu Yi opened his eyes, he discovered that the sky was already bright. Yi and Hua Ci's voices could be heard from outside the window. Lu Yi got up and walked to the window. He looked down and saw smoke curling up from the kitchen. The two women were chatting and laughing as they busied themselves. He rested his arms on the windowsill and quietly looked down, his heart filled with warmth. If it weren't for Hua Ci putting some lively and strange little things into a jar to make soup, this warmth would have lasted for a long time. "Lu Yi, you're awake?" Yi looked up and met Lu Ye's eyes. She raised her hand and greeted him. Lu Yi casually responded. He retracted his head and said, "Call me when you can eat." Sitting cross-legged on the bed, he took out a book on saber cultivation from his storage bag and carefully studied it. The Wild Saber sect was a first-grade sect with the highest concentration of saber users. Since ancient times, there were countless experts who used sabers in the sect. The saber cultivation knowledge passed down was also difficult to calculate. Chapter 432. Lu Yi asked the Wild Saber sect for 20 saber cultivation notes, but to the Wild Saber sect, this was not a problem at all. Moreover, he was sure that the saber cultivation notes given by the Wild Saber sect were more basic and did not involve any advanced cultivation techniques. Lu Yi did not expect them to give him anything profound in the first place. Looking at the contents of the notes, he was gradually inspired. That was until Yi came up with a basin, wet a towel, and carefully rubbed it on Lu Ye's face. After a while, in the small courtyard outside the wooden house, Lu Yi and Hua Si sat opposite each other and ate. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Lu Yi said, "I'm going back to the encampment. I should be breaking through to the Cloud River realm soon. What are your plans?" "Nothing for now," Hua Si replied casually as she cleaned up. "Are you going to stay here forever?" Lu Yi was puzzled. "Don't worry about me. I have my own plans. Anyway, if you work hard on your cultivation, maybe even if I'm at the Spirit Stream battlefield, I'll improve faster than you." Hua Si winked at him as she spoke. Lu Yi snorted. "Then I'll have to work hard." He stood up, took out his spirit boat and stepped on it. "I've left some cultivation resources for you in the room on the 3rd floor. I'll wait for you at the Cloud River battlefield." Lu Yi nodded and soared into the sky, turning into a stream of light and disappearing. Watching Lu Yi leave, Hua Si smiled and continued to clean up the messy table. There was not much bitterness in her heart. A short parting was just for a better reunion. When Lu Yi first set off from the encampment to the core circle, he had to ride with giant armor all the way. It took him a total of 10 days to reach the Pill Heart sect's encampment. But now that his cultivation had increased greatly, his speed and endurance were much better than before. This time, it took him less than 3 days to return to the Jade Blood sect's encampment. Because of his identity as a guardian, he could quietly enter the defensive formation. But as soon as he entered, he was noticed by the cultivator in charge of monitoring the encampment. He went up to check and saw Lu Yi, exclaiming in joy, "Fifth's senior brother is back." The news spread quickly, and people kept gathering here. Lu Yi looked up and saw that there were many cultivators in his encampment. Most of them were unfamiliar faces, and only a small number of them were familiar. Among those unfamiliar faces, there were some who looked very young, only 12 or 13 years old. Lu Yi guessed that these very young people should be the disciples that the sect had recently recruited. As for the older ones, perhaps some of them were from the sect, but most of them were likely disciples from other sects who had come to Blue Blood sect to cultivate. Looking at the outer ring of the battlefield, there were countless sects, but in terms of the density of world energy, the Blue Blood sect station was second to none. This was because the last time Lu Yi had come back, he had bought as much world energy as possible. Compared to the outside world, the concentration of spirit chi here was 11 times higher. This was something that no sect in the outer circle could compare with. If they wanted to break this limit, the Blue Blood sect would have to raise its grade to the 6th stage and move its base to the inner circle of the battlefield. Furthermore, the Jade Blood sect was currently in the limelight. The nearby Myriad Devil Mountain sect was suppressed to the point that they could not even raise their heads. Coming here to cultivate would not only ensure the efficiency of their cultivation, but also ensure their safety. Therefore, the sects that were on good terms with the Jade Blood sect were more than happy to send their disciples here. The only drawback was that the speed of gaining merit points was a little slow. In the base, there were many pairs of eyes that were filled with curiosity, admiration, reverence, and all sorts of other emotions. Lu Yi was stunned to find that the cultivators he was familiar with in the past were basically nowhere to be seen. For example, Kong Niu, Ruan Lingyu, Hixin, Gu Yang, and the others had all entered the inner circle. The Spirit Stream battlefield had always been like this. The new generation replaced the old, and the cultivators were always rushing about the huge battlefield, fighting for their own cultivation and future. The ones who could survive the waves and waves would be the final winners. Lu Yi didn't even know who the deputy guardian of the Blue Blood sect was. After entering the Tianji Hall, he exchanged the blessings obtained from the myriad Devil Mountain sect stations for merit points. At a rate visible to the naked eye, the number representing the sect's merit points rapidly increased. It had to be known that the 20 to 30 sects stations in the inner circle had been destroyed, and all of their blessings had been taken away by Lu Yi alone. Even if they had lost a lot during the plundering, the number of blessings obtained in the end was still extremely terrifying. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the sect's merit points were fixed at a number that started with 3 words and was counted in units of 10 million. Looking at the entire Spirit Stream battlefield, the Blue Blood sect was probably the only sect with such a huge amount of merit points. With so many merit points, the range of the Blue Blood sect station could be expanded by more than 10 times. However, Lu Yi didn't plan to use these merit points for the time being. The grade of the sect would definitely increase, and it was only a matter of time. Once the grade of the sect increased to the level where it could be moved to the inner circle, it would inevitably cost a lot of merit points. Currently, the Blue Blood sect station didn't have anything to spend merit points on, so there was no harm in saving up more. He only gave himself a monthly salary, which brought his merit points to a round number of 100,000. He used the Tianji pillar to return to the sect. Shui Yuan, who had already received the news, was waiting in front of the Tianji Hall. When she sensed the commotion, she looked up and saw Lu Yi walking out with a ring of storage bags hanging from his waist. She couldn't help but laugh. She had long heard that this little junior brother of hers had asked the remaining hundreds of myriad Devil Mountain sect stations for a lot of benefits after conquering more than 20 stations. Now, it seemed that the benefits were quite a lot. Second senior sister. Lu Yi stepped forward. Shui Yuan nodded and looked him up and down. You've become darker and stronger. Exposed to the elements, there's nothing I can do about it. As he spoke, he took off the storage bags hanging from his waist and handed them all to Shui Yuan. He immediately felt relaxed. So much. Shui Yuan only knew that Lu Yi had made a fortune this time, but she didn't know how much. After all, the myriad Devil Mountain sect hadn't spread the news in detail. Now that she checked, she was shocked to discover that the myriad Devil Mountain sect had lost a lot of blood this time. Leave it for the sect to develop. You can deal with it as you see fit. Lu Yi said, I'll go pay a visit to the sect master. The old man isn't here. Shui Yuan said. Then I'll go pay a visit to Madame Yun. Every time he returned from outside, these 2 elders had to pay their respects immediately. This was etiquette. Wait a moment. Shui Yuan shouted, then took out a wooden box from her storage bag and handed it to Lu Yi. Lu Yi took it and opened it to see that there were 2 jade bottles inside. The bottles were filled with some amber-colored spirit pills, each of them about the size of a soybean. I refined it with the honey you got giant armor to bring back. It has the effect of nourishing one's skin. Madame Yun should like it if I give it to her. Women would always care about their appearance, especially older women. They were afraid that one day they would lose their beauty. Therefore, in the cultivation world, things that had the effect of nourishing one's skin were generally sought after by female cultivators. Lu Yi was surprised. Then honey has such an effect? He really didn't know. Previously, giant armor was forced to advance to the Cloud River realm in the Forest of 1,000 Poisons. Before returning to the sect, Lu Yi brought back a large amount of honey for Shui Yuan to study and see if it could be used to refine pills that could restore spiritual energy. But now, it seemed that there weren't any pills that could restore spiritual energy, but pills that could nourish one's skin were refined. Yes, I've tried. Shui Yuan said with a smile. And bringing this thing is better than bringing fish every time. Second senior sister is thoughtful. With that said, Lu Yi simply gave all the honey he had stored to Shui Yuan. Since honey had the effect of nourishing one's skin, it would be a waste to leave it in his hands. As for the royal jelly, there wasn't much left. Lu Yi also gave it to Shui Yuan. As for how to deal with it, it was up to second senior sister. He took out his spirit weapon and went straight to Bright Heart Peak to meet Madame Yun. He presented the gifts he brought. As expected, Madame Yun was beaming with joy and was in a good mood. She praised Lu Yi for being filial and sensible. However, there were still necessary tests. During this period of time outside, Lu Yi's attainments in the Tao of Spirit Tattoos had improved, so it wasn't difficult for him to deal with Madame Yun's tests. Lu Yi benefited a lot from her guidance. He returned the books he had borrowed before and borrowed a new batch of books. Lu Yi realized that he had already read almost half of the books on the Tao of Spirit Tattoos that Madame Yun had collected. In the evening, Lu Yi bade farewell to Madame Yun. "After you advance to the Cloud River realm, come and find me." "Yes." As usual, it was the servant girl who didn't speak and only knew how to smile that sent Lu Yi out. Every time Lu Yi saw this servant girl, he had a strange feeling. He always felt that this servant girl wasn't as real as what he saw. When he returned to Jade Tripod Peak, second senior sister had already prepared a table of medicinal dishes. Lu Yi swung his arms and ate heartily. "All right, second senior sister, why do you want me to return to the sect before I advance to the Cloud River realm?" Lu Yi asked as he ate. "Nothing much. I just want you to advance in the sect's encampment so that the disciples can observe properly. Also, the old man said that your advancement this time might be a little unusual." "Unusual?" "And it's not convenient to tell you now because the old man isn't sure. When you advance, you'll know whether it's true or not," Shui Yuan said as she picked up food for Lu Yi. Lu Yi nodded and said, "Then second senior sister, tell me about the Cloud River battlefield." After he advanced to the Cloud River realm, he would enter the Cloud River battlefield. Naturally, he had to understand some information about the Cloud River battlefield in advance. Cloud River battlefield. Shui Yuan's eyes revealed a look of reminiscence. She pursed her lips and smiled. That place is completely different from the Spirit Stream battlefield. Moreover, the Cloud River battlefield is much more interesting than the Spirit Stream battlefield. However, it's also much more dangerous. Shui Yuan had obviously also experienced the Cloud River battlefield. She immediately explained some of the rules of the Cloud River battlefield to Lu Yi. Lu Yi listened carefully and memorized it. At the end, Shui Yuan reminded him, "Remember one thing. In the Cloud River battlefield, the Myriad Devil Ridge is not an eternal enemy. Sometimes, you even need to cooperate to achieve your goals." "Understood." Chapter 433. The next day, in the outer ring of the Spirit Stream battlefield, Jade Blood Sect Station, Lu Yi sat and waited in the meeting hall. After a while, two people stepped in and saluted Lu Yi together, fifth senior brother. Lu Yi put down the teacup in his hand and looked at the two. They were both familiar faces and could be said to be the first batch of disciples to join Jade Blood Sect. However, because they were rogue cultivators and didn't have high aptitude, even after such a long time, their cultivation hadn't improved much. Now, one of them was a 7th order and the other a 6th order. Even so, it was much better than their ambitions as rogue cultivators. When they joined Jade Blood Sect, they were only 3rd or 4th order cultivators. They thought that they would at most reach the 7th or 8th order in their lifetime, but now it seemed that they could still look forward to the future. The cultivation environment of the Blue Blood Sect's encampment was excellent, and there was an abundance of cultivation resources. Therefore, even the loose cultivators had grown beyond their potential. Lu Yi looked at the 7th order cultivator. "Duan Yi. Transfer your authority as the vice envoy to Cheng Mu." Cheng Mu was the 6th order cultivator. Duan Yi responded and respectfully asked Tianji to transfer his authority as the vice envoy and his vice envoy seal to Cheng Mu. After he was done, Lu Yi handed over the authority and seal of the vice envoy to Duan Yi. In this way, the 7th order cultivator Duan Yi became the vice envoy, and the 6th order cultivator Cheng Mu became the vice envoy. Choosing Cheng Mu as the vice envoy was not Lu Yi's idea. It was a comprehensive consideration after consulting his second senior sister last night. At present, the new generation of disciples of Jade Blood Sect was still growing and couldn't support the sect for the time being. so the vice envoy and the vice envoy could only be chosen from the earliest batch of disciples to join. Duan Yi and Cheng Mu's aptitude was indeed not very good, but they were steady. They handled things well. In the current Jade Blood Sect station, their strength was still acceptable. The reason why he didn't choose other 7th Order cultivators as the vice envoy was mainly because the 7th Order was not far from the 8th Order. Once they reached the 8th Order, they would have to leave the station. Choosing a 6th Order cultivator would allow them to stay in the station for a longer time. When Cheng Mu broke through to the 7th Order, Duani would be about to leave, and Cheng Mu would take over. When Gu Yang took over the position of Deputy Guardian, I told him to take care of the encampment. They also needed to find candidates for the next Guardian and Deputy Guardian. I will say the same thing to all of you. In the future, I'll need the 2 of you to take care of the outpost. We will definitely not disappoint the sect and 5th senior brother. The 2 of them declared together. Lu Yi nodded lightly. Go. Cultivate well. There was no need to care about aptitude or talent. Your future is not limited to the outer ring of the battlefield. After the 2 of them left, Lu Yi walked out of the meeting hall. He flew up on his weapon. They arrived at a nearby spiritual peak. Little Gray flapped its wings and walked over. Lu Yi took out a blood-red trout from his storage bag and fed it. Xiao Hui ate them one by one as if they were bugs. Lu Yi stroked its feathers. When eldest brother left the Spirit Stream battlefield all those years ago, he asked you to take good care of the sex base. Now that we've passed the most difficult time, the days ahead will only get better. If you want to leave, you can leave at any time. You don't have to guard this place anymore. Of course, you can come back whenever you want. If you're willing to stay, that's even better. Little Gray was an overlord-level monster beast and undoubtedly understood human nature, so Lu Yi knew that it could understand his words. The Blue Blood sect had declined for 30 years, and Little Gray had guarded the outpost for 30 years. Even if there were no disciples in the outpost, it still adhered to eldest brother's instructions and never left. The little eagle from back then had gradually grown into an overlord-level existence. However, it was still a flying eagle. It also yearned for freedom and the sky, so Lu Yi felt that you can give it more freedom and choice. As for how Little Gray would choose, that was its own business. A moment later, Lu Yi soared into the sky on his weapon. He quickly disappeared. After a while, the loud cry of an eagle sounded. In the outpost, many disciples of the Blue Blood sect looked over and saw Little Gray's figure flapping its wings and flying away. It flew all the way east at an extremely fast speed. 5 days later, Lu Yi landed at the top of a flat mountain. This peak was extremely strange. It was as if some peerless expert had cut off the spiritual peak with a single slash. The peak was flat and smooth like a mirror. There were still some dark bloodstains left on the peak, indicating that a great battle had once broken out here. Golden Light Peak. Back then, he had fought 43 battles here with his 5th Order Spirit Stream Realm cultivation, killing many 6th Order Myriad Demons Ridge cultivators and finally winning himself a chance to live. This was where Lu Yi became famous. It was also where his legend began. In a flash, it had been almost 2 years. Time had passed so quickly. In 2 years, he had gone from the 5th Order Spirit Stream realm to the 9th Heaven realm. This cultivation speed was already very fast. Only those cultivators from top sects with excellent talent could hope to compete with Lu Yi. Rumor had it that the Golden Light Peak contained an opportunity because the terrain here was created by a saber master. There were remnants of that master's saber techniques here. However, Li did not feel anything special here. He continued on his journey, all the way forward. A day later, he passed by a spiritual peak. Below it was a valley. Back then, he rode on Hooper and shouted, "Lu Yi is here." In that valley, Lan Yu Dai and Big Dipper sects cultivators blocked the Myriad Demons Ridge's pursuers for him, fighting a bloody battle. He continued to move forward, walking the path he had taken 2 years ago. 2 years ago, he was so weak. He rode on Hoopa and set off from Blue Cloud Mountain with it. He held a 10-point map in his hand and set off towards Blue Blood sect's encampment. Along the way, he had experienced many hardships. But 2 years later, He could cross the road in one day that he could not complete in 1 or 2 months back then. Now, he had also grown into an overlord. His emotions were fluctuating. The sky in the outer circle was very calm, unlike the inner circle. When flying on artifacts, he would occasionally encounter some cultivators flying on artifacts. The cultivators in the outer circle did not have high cultivation and did not even have the capital to fly on artifacts, so how could he encounter anyone? After setting off from Blue Blood Sect's encampment, Lu Yi arrived at the encampment of a Grand Heaven Alliance sect after 10 days. The 10-point map showed that this was Blue Feather Mountain. There were 2 powerhouses from the Myriad Demons Ridge nearby. One was the Supreme Luo sect, and the other was the Qin clan. At the intersection of the 3 powerhouses, there was a 100-peak mountain with a total of 100 peaks. In the past 2 years, Lu Yi had killed many people from the Supreme Luo sect and the Qin clan here. Landing outside the encampment of the Blue Feather Mountain, Lu Yi sized up the defensive formation before him. The reaction of the sects in the outer circle was much worse than the inner circle. When Lu Yi had attacked those sects in the inner circle, each time he appeared, he would be detected immediately and cause chaos. However, when he arrived at the encampment of the Blue Feather Mountain, no one here had detected him. It wasn't until a long time later that a cultivator passing by saw Lu Yi standing outside the Grand Array and immediately became vigilant. Just when Lu Yi was about to introduce himself, suddenly, he frowned as if a heavenly secret had descended. The baptism bestowed by the heavenly secret had arrived. This was the 4th baptism he had experienced after reaching the 1st place of the spirit stream ranking. According to his previous experience and estimation, after this baptism, the baptism bestowed by the heavenly secret would not be of much use to him. He did not resist and allowed the heavenly secret to guide him. His vision changed, and he soon appeared in the heavenly secret pond. Just as Lu Yi had expected, although the spiritual mist in the heavenly secret pond was still dense, it did not increase Lu Yi's strength by much. Not only him, but Yi and Hu Po were the same. He had reached his limit. In other words, even if Lu Yi continued to stay in the spirit stream stage, he would not gain any benefits. He had already accumulated what he needed to, and it was time to advance to the Cloud River stage. At the same time, inside the encampment of the Blue Feather Mountain, the cultivator who had seen Lu Yi called a group of people over. Among them was the guardian of the Blue Feather Mountain, Su Zining. Where is he? Su Zining's gaze swept over, but he did not see anyone. He was here just now. I don't know why he suddenly disappeared. The cultivator who had seen Lu Yi pointed to a place and explained. Suddenly disappeared? Su Zining frowned. Could it be a ghost cultivator? Only ghost cultivators had the ability to suddenly disappear. Did you see his cultivation? Su Zining asked again. I didn't see him. He disappeared too quickly. Su Zining's expression became serious. Pass down the order. Have the disciples in the sect remain vigilant. If there are any suspicious people or things, report it immediately. Su Zining was unsure of that person's identity and intentions, so he naturally prepared for the worst. Everyone acknowledged, and the hundreds of cultivators in the Blue Feather Mountain immediately entered a state of battle readiness. Lu Yi did not expect that his appearance would cause the Blue Feather Mountain to be so vigilant. The timing was too coincidental. He had just arrived at the Blue Feather Mountain encampment when the heavenly secret reward arrived. An hour later, Lu Yi appeared outside the Blue Feather Mountain encampment again, at the place where he had disappeared. He immediately felt someone looking at him. He looked up and saw a few cultivators looking at him warily. One of them shouted, "Who are you?" Lu Yi looked at them. Jade Blood Sect's Lu Yi has come to visit. The Blue Feather Mountain was a sect of the Grand Heaven Alliance. He naturally would not casually barge into their encampment. Moreover, he was indebted to the Blue Feather Mountain. Jade Blood Sect's Lu Yi? One of the cultivators frowned. For some reason, he felt that the name was familiar, but he could not remember where he had heard it before. Lu Yi had been wandering in the core circle recently. Previously, he was in the inner circle, so recently, there were not many rumors about him in the outer circle. This caused the cultivators in the outer circle to be stunned when they heard his name. However, That person soon remembered. He pointed at Lu Yi and said with a trembling finger, You're the spirit stream top disciple, Lu Yi. Everyone knew about Lu Yi. How could they know about Lu Yi? Yes. Several cultivators immediately became excited. Someone hurriedly ran inside and prepared to report. How could the cultivators in the outer circle have the chance to see the spirit stream top disciple? Moreover, to many cultivators in the Grand Heaven Alliance, Jade Blood Sect's Lu Yi was already an invincible symbol. Also, the sect-destroying Yi and the spirit stream top 3 disasters were not titles that ordinary people could achieve. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.